Tonight, we slip back to a cold, starlit plain where a breathing ring of fire keeps the dark just far enough away for your shoulders to unclench. You edge nearer, palms open to the glow, and the air tastes like pine smoke and wet stone while voices relax into a hush you can almost feel on your skin. Beyond the light, eyes blink and fade. Inside the circle, laughs and warnings braid into something older than sleep. Without the flame, the night is not friendly. And yes, you probably won't survive this without borrowing a little courage from the coals. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments so the campfire stretches around the world. Bangkok, midnight. Paris, sunset. Toronto, morning. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You squat to feed the fire a handful of twigs, feeling the heat nibble your knuckles. The band gathers by habit, a yawn here, a whispered joke there, a child braided into a parent's lap. The flame redraws the night into a room. Without walls, a ceiling of stars and a floor of ash. With it, you stretch the day. Embers by extra hours, and extra hours by extra words, gossip turning to news, swelling into legend. Someone reenacts the river crossing with a stick in the dust. Someone else upgrades the tale with pauses and the perfectly timed gasp. Every camp has an aspiring director. Yours accepts payment in roasted tubers. A steady fact glows in the background. Archaeologists find ancient hearths, reddened soil, ash lenses, circles of stone-charred bone at sites hundreds of thousands of years old. Controlled fire settles into daily life, long before pottery fields or streets, cooking tubers, and meat softening fibers and blunting certain plant toxins. It turns biting cold into manageable weather and persuades predators that dinner is better elsewhere, preferably not among loud bipeds holding pointy sticks. The flame is a tool you don't swing. It waits and changes everything. The pace of night becomes yours. You twos wake to poke the coals, then drift again, a braided rhythm, perfect for a camp with babies, elders, and the occasional curious hyena. In the glow, your hands tackle fiddly work, twist cordage patch, a sandal press, a flake edge sharper, counting each clean tap by the flare of sparks. The heat loosens tongues. Someone mimes the day's tracks heel-toe, pause leap teaching how the ground records a story. If you read it slowly like subtitles for the earth. Yes, it's a binge series. Season 1 Mud. Here's the quirky bit: ash and smoke make decent mosquito armor. You smear a little ash into animal fat and stripe your forearms, and the buzzing fleet loses interest. Some nights, you carry a slow ember tucked in a bark cup, or a skull cap padded with clay, so the next campsite lights fast, convenient, fussy, and a little sassy. Historians still argue whether nighttime storytelling helps shape complex language, or whether richer language unlocks the long, careful tales that fire invites. They also debate how often people discovered fire anew versus how often they simply kept it alive for weeks, nursing embers like precious pets. Either way, conversation thickens into memory. Memory hardens into custom, and custom performs the neat magic of turning what just happened into how things are done. Rules wrapped in rhythm tend to stick. You teach as you talk. You coax sparks from stone to tinder and breathe until fibers glow like a tiny sunrise. You pass a roasted root to a child who had sworn vegetables were a personal insult, but now agrees they are acceptable, maybe even brag-worthy. We take those wins. You rehearse signals for tomorrow. 1 grunt, 2 whistles, 1 tap, because coordination under stress is just choreography with pointier costumes. When laughter swells, you let it. Humor keeps minds awake, and an awake camp is a safer camp. The fire is billboard and boundary. Its light declares this spot is occupied. These humans are organized. These spears are warming nicely. predators hesitate at the edge where orange melts into black. When the wood pops, resin sparks arc like tiny meteors and eyes tilt up as if on a string. Someone points out a crooked ladder of stars. Someone else recalls an elder's chalk drawing of the same pattern, and suddenly grandparent and toddler hold the same sky. Time braids your present threads through someone else's memory and ties a knot you'll tug tomorrow. The ceremonial creeps in even if no one names it. A bone flute squeaks, a drum answers, a rhythm folds the group into a shared heartbeat. Words ride the beat, trying out shapes. A child asks why the moon follows camp, and 3 answers arrive. 1 calm and practical, 1 cheeky, and 1 deliciously uncanny. The camp keeps all 3 because usefulness, humor, and wonder make a sturdy tripod. You run a small experiment. Ask the elder with the far-sighted voice to retell the first fire story, but start in the middle. She does, and the tale jolts like a startled deer, then settles into a new groove. You discover suspense, and that leaving something out can make every ear lean forward. For the skeptics, watch how these stories carry survival rules the way honey carries a sting. Don't sleep by the reeds. Watch the sky after heat. Lightning never poke glowing logs with your good spear. Lesson learned the Smoky way. Before sleep, you rake the coals into a low ring, a glowing fence. Someone takes the watcher's seat, not just for shred-clawed nightmares, though they get a cameo, but for wind shifts and wandering sparks. The watcher's thoughts climb into the galaxy-spilled dark. The fire breathes. The watcher matches it. A last joke drifts across the circle about roasted tubers, turned avant-garde charcoal sculpture, and the camp settles with the quiet pride of a day survived on purpose. As your eyes close, one more slightly fringe practice warms from memory. Some groups bank a hearth under dung and clay, letting it sleep for days, and wake with a puff like a dream that remembers itself. Tomorrow, you'll stir those coals, and the first ribbon of smoke will rise with the first story. Tonight, the flame keeps steady company, while the dark stays politely on the other side of the light. Morning leans into camp, and you settle by the hearth where the ashes warm, but no longer bossy. You roll a river cobble in your palm. Volcanic glass if you're lucky, fine-grained chert if you're practical and listen for the clean ring that says, "This stone wants to become many things." The first tap is hello. The second is a decision. The cobble answers with a conchoidal sigh, a bulb of percussion blooming like a tiny sunrise across the flake's belly. Ripples step outward, time-lapse waves on a stone lake, and suddenly you're holding a razor that wasn't here 5 seconds ago. You put it to work on something that matters. Mainstream fact handy and sharp. By around 2.6 million years ago, people are already knocking useful flakes from round stones. Oldowan tools. Later, Aeolian hand axes arrive carefully shaped, 2-sided palm-fitting teardrops that spread across Africa and Eurasia for more than 1 million years. Then come prepared core methods like levallois, where you plan the flake before you free it, so a single well-timed blow releases exactly the piece you need. You rotate the core and eye the platform. Hard hammer first another stone to start the rough work, then soft hammer a smoothed antler baton for subtler nudges. The rhythm shifts from clack to thock, a muffled heartbeat. You abrade the edge with sandstone so the next blow doesn't skid a little like roughing up a basketball for grip. Except the referee is a hyena, and we do not want a rematch. Teaching happens in the shuffle of elbows. An elder slides close not to take over but to tilt your wrist a degree and save you a bandage. You practice platform isolation. Create a small flat you can hit cleanly. The flake peels longer now, narrower, and a child breathes a quiet, "Oh," because magic performed slowly is still magic. The margin between sharp enough to skin a hair and congrats you've made a paperweight is where patience turns into skill. You keep the ash on your fingers from last night's mosquito armor. It dries sweat and gives grip. Camp joke, it's also the prehistoric hand moisturizer charcoal chic matte finish 5 stars would recommend. Quirky tidbit, some nappers spit on a platform to reveal the sheen and micro-angle. Others lick a flake edge before hafting, so plant fiber bindings grab sooner. Not glamorous, but the results are snug, and the audience is forgiving. The toolkit blooms as you lean toward finesse. You strike bladelets for slicing thick-backed scrapers, for hides and burins, for carving grooves in bone. You experiment with microliths, thumbnail-sized slivers slotted into wood or horn to make composite knives, barbed points, and saws. The big advantage: if a tip breaks, you replace the tiny part, instead of mourning your one heroic blade. Welcome to modular design, the Swiss Army of deep time minus the corkscrew. When the wind turns ugly, you edge closer to the coals. With your best problem, this stone is good, but a little stubborn. Heat treatment time. You bury the blanks in sand at the hearth's shoulder, feed the fire with patient fuel, and let the temperature smooth the lattice until the flint works like buttered glass. Archaeologists will one day point to ancient layers full of heat-treated stone and call it a milestone of craftsmanship. Today, you just call it worth the wait, like soup. Historians still argue whether the elegant symmetry of hand axes is mostly about function, good grip, strong edges, predictable fracture, or partly a social display, a pebble peacock tail announcing time skill and a steady hand. They also debate how much true teaching versus sharp-eyed imitation fuels the spread of complex methods. Was language required, or can gestures and slow demonstration do? The heavy lifting, you shrug, because you learn all three ways every week. Now the glue. Pine resin warmed and stirred with charcoal dust becomes a dark candy that refuses to let go. If you're lucky, you blister bark to make birch pitch sticky, smoky, and strong. You lash a flake into a forked stick with sinew, dab the join with pitch, and rotate it near the coals until it sets. The first time the blade holds and doesn't wiggle, you grin like you invented the future. In fairness, you kind of did. Work is loud in small ways. Chips ringing, antler tapping the soft hiss of sand, so you step a few paces from the storyteller circle. Debitage the glittering carpet of waste flakes builds at your feet, and you rescue a few, because waste is a rude word when every sliver can slice cordage or scale a fish. You tuck the best cores into a leather roll, a traveling kit that beats your pockets into lumpy submission. Your hands aren't iron. They're deliberate. You flex fingers, stretch wrists, and tape a knuckle with a leaf after a slip. The elder shows you a scar the size of a grain and the trick of using a wooden support under a thin flake, so pressure removes tiny curls without snapping the piece. Pressure flaking feels like sculpting with breath. You exhale, the edge refines, and the tool crosses from crude to careful in a dozen steady pushes. Fact doubles back with a wider view. Stone tools outlive their makers and map their movements. Obsidian from a far ridge turns up at a lakeside camp. Shells, drilled into beads, appear hundreds of miles inland. Even the angle of a flake's scar whispers which tradition someone learned and from whom. As afternoon settles, you test your kit. A new scraper whispers along a hide, lifting pale ribbons that fall like curled feathers. A drill spins between your palms into a pilot hole through bone, a place for a bead that will clink softly in the night. A flake as thin as a dragonfly wing trims bark for a woven basket. The tools don't make you stronger. They make your choices sharper, which most days is better. When the light slides low, you sweep the flake field into a tidy crescent. No one likes sitting on surprise razors, and carry your toolkit back to the circle. The fire lifts its eyebrows in orange greeting. Someone wants a spoon. Someone else wants a story. A child asks to try the antler baton, and you help small hands feel the stone's secret doorways. Another tool, another laugh, and another day where you've quietly made the world easier to live in one bright edge at a time. You wake hungry, the ring of ash, still warm enough to take the sting out of the air. Yesterday's stone kit rides your hip, the thin flake that shaves, bark the scraper with a bite like frost, the drill that hums between your palms. You shoulder a woven carrier and step into grass combed by dew. Rule 1 is simple and it never changes. You don't wait for food. You go, make food happen. The menu is a scatter, not a line. In the hedgerow, berries lacquer your fingertips purple and sweet. Beyond it, the ground bulges with secrets, tubers tucked under soil like buried moons. Your digging stick bites, twists, lifts, and a starchy weight rises mud-slick and promising. The elder's protocol follows. Scratch the skin, sniff the cut touch to lip weight. Some roots soften their scowl when sliced thin and roasted by the coals. Others earn a permanent place on the camp's nope list. You tie the friendly slices into a leaf parcel and lay them by the quiet edge of the fire. Steam curls up smelling like bread, daydreaming about soup. Mainstream fact, steady as heartbeat. Long before farms, human groups live on flexible diets, meat and fish. When the chase pays off, insects, when the air hums, seeds and nuts and fruit, when branches lean and crucially starchy. Underground storage organs that sit still and can be coaxed into tenderness. Bones and teeth remember this later cut marks and fractured long bones for marrow starch grains, trapped in dental calculus and microware that records both tough meat and gritty plant meals. Fire, your night companion, does day duty too. Roasting gels, the starches loosens fibers and tames some plant toxins, so your gut gets more for less work. Cooking, in other words, is your favorite invisible muscle. Up in a hollowed tree, bees are holding a staff meeting. You dust your forearms with last night's ash charcoal chic anti-mosquito pro grip and tease a bundle of punky wood into a slow smoke. The bees rise in a velvet question mark, curious but not furious, and you climb with respect and a firm sense of limits. Knife ready, you lift a comb that glows like a thumb-sized sun and leave plenty behind so the hive recovers. This is not greed. It's a treaty negotiated in smoke and patience. Back on the ground, your bark bowl shines with honey so bright it could pass for liquefied noon. Quirky but true tidbit in parts of Africa, a small bird called the honey guide will scold humans into following and then lead them to wild hives. People open the nest. The bird feasts on wax and larvae. Both sides strut away convinced they got the better end of the bargain. You listen for the right call note as you descend, just in case today is one of those cooperative days when the forest itself seems to hand you a spoon. The morning turns into a tiny marketplace. Tubers swap for berries. A sliver of flint trades for a fist of comb. Someone offers to babysit in exchange for a sticky taste. Sharing here isn't charity, it's infrastructure. When you're flush, you spread it around. When you come up empty, you still eat because yesterday someone else was flush. Hoarding earns jokes first, then side eye, then a social winter no coat can fix. Reputation, in the absence of refrigeration, keeps food moving, and yes, that line earns a grin around the hearth. Historians still argue whether early humans leaned harder on big game hunting or sharp-eyed scavenging, and whether plants or meat supplied more of the year's calories. Some emphasize persistence hunts, long steady chases beneath hot skies where patience outruns speed and an antelope's engine finally knocks. Others underline the wisdom of carving yesterday's lion leftovers with stone edges that never learned feline property law. The debate hums like the bees, but you live by one rule: be opportunistic with flair. By midday, your trap line waits in the thicket grass that looks like grass until a rabbit disagrees. Section 2's toolkit gets an encore. A burin nips a notch in a trigger stick. A thin blade tidies cordage spun from plant fibers until it sings under your fingers. Each loop is a polite promise to your later self. You scatter roasted seeds in a pattern you will recognize, because even without maps, your brain loves breadcrumb trails it can read on the walk home. Heat wobbles above the flats. A small antelope ghosts the edge of open ground. You move with wind in your face and sun at your back, rearranging possibilities, one quiet step at a time. One teammate becomes a shrub. Another practices stillness until stillness believes them. You become the hinge. The plan swings on. When the line forms, you send a spear with the theater of mailing a letter. No sprinting, no shouting, just intent. The animal drops quickly. Gratitude rises faster. Efficiency is respect, and respect keeps spirit steady. No gore, just craft. A flake whispers under hide. A scraper lifts pale curls. The first steam of cooking lands on your reward center like a remembered song. You take what travels strips for now ribbons, for drying on a rack fat rendered into a clean burning helper bones, cracked for marrow that tastes like good news. The rest returns to the land promptly. Insects and scavengers perform their ancient sanitation dance. You step aside because cooperation with the ecosystem is the original cleanup crew. Zoom the lens for a moment. In some landscapes, plants dominate the calorie budget across the year. Tubers, nuts, baobab fruit, with meat spiking like a holiday when herds pass. In others, rivers turn protein into rhythm, and everyone smells faintly of fish for a season. Your body doesn't require ideology. It prefers reliability. Stone-boiled stews appear when you drop heat-soaked rocks into bark bowls and watch the water grin. Smoking over green branches paints meat with time so it lasts, and seeds become flour under a flat stone while shoulders learn the steady circle that makes bread possible, centuries early in spirit, if not in recipe. Fringe-feeling practice that works a taste of clay or charcoal with certain bitter plants can bind compounds that would otherwise pitch a fit in your gut geophagy as troubleshooting. You don't call it chemistry. You call it not repeating yesterday's mistake. Also, honey on everything briefly convinces you that you are a culinary genius. You are not wrong. Light joke inventory treaty, mailed letter genius, balanced breakfast. Historians still argue whether the postcard version men hunt women gather ever fit the deep past. Evidence suggests skill opportunity and childcare logistics write the schedule more than job titles do. Today, your sharpest tracker is a grandmother who reads bruised grass like sheet music, and your nimblest climber is a teenager who treats bee stings as performance notes. Whoever can do the job does the job. The camp eats, and the camp remembers who helped. Evening leans in. The drying rack clicks like bone chimes. Leaf parcels whisper at the coals. Kids haul tubers as if dragging treasure chests. Elders turn seeds to meal with slow circles that look easy until you try them. You stir a pot with a stick that has earned a name, the diplomat. Because it prevents small arguments from boiling when someone suggests more salt that doesn't exist. The soup smells like your day smoke starch herbs. The steady base note of cooked meat and a glaze of sweetness licked from your thumb. Bowls move clockwise. Stories counterclockwise, which keeps the traffic civil. The first spoon is silence. The second grants permission for laughter. A child falls asleep wearing a honey mustache, a glittering badge of membership. Remember last night's ember banking under dung and clay. You bank calories the same way jerky, braided on a rack, tubers tucked in a cool pit. Knowledge woven into jokes, so it won't slip when everyone is tired. Tomorrow's you. Thanks today's you with a small smug nod. You keep mostly to yourself. Before the stars own the sky, you tuck one more lesson where even sleep can find it. Your diet isn't a labelin', it's a moving target. Today is meat tubers and honey. Tomorrow might be fish and fruit. Next week, insects and nuts, with the rare miracle of eggs like a holiday. Your ancestors don't argue in comment sections. They argue with hunger and win by being interesting eaters. Somewhere out there, a honey guide clears its throat. You smile into the dark full, a little sticky, and already plotting which tree to climb when morning grins open again. The wind has opinions this morning. It combs the grass backward and tastes your ears for weakness, so you answer with preparation, the quiet theater of turning weather into wardrobe. You start with fiber because it grows everywhere your patience does. A handful of nettle stems, a twist of bast from lime tree bark, a ribbon of sinewy inner willow. Each wants the same kindness. Split, scrape, soak, and tease until strands separate like old friends drifting to their favorite seats by the fire. You roll them on your thigh, and the twist catches thread being born from the friction of skin and habit. A few minutes later, you're feeding a growing cord through your fingers, listening to the tiny purr it makes when it's right. You remember last night's ash on skin trick, the charcoal chic mosquito armor and grin, because clothing begins as an extension of that idea. Keep the bitey things out, keep the warmth in, keep your dignity plausibly intact when a rude gust auditions you for a comedy. Plant fibers become net bags, belts, slings, and ties. 2 slings become a vest if you're stubborn and inventive. With yesterday's toolkit, burin for grooves, scraper for hide, thin blade for finesse. You nudge materials from raw to ready, turning flexible strands into structure. Mainstream fact, steady and fascinating. People wear clothing long before streets or doorbells. One of the clever clues comes from genetics, not bones, but lice. Clothing lice split from head lice, at least many tens of thousands of years ago, likely well over 100,000, implying that garments had joined the daily routine by then. Later bone needles with drilled eyes appear in the archaeological record, sleek little miracles that let thread pass cleanly, evidence of true tailoring rather than simple wrapping. You start a hide by scraping. The flint edge whispers across skin, lifting curls that fall like pale snow. You stretch the pelt on a frame lashed with fresh cordage, then massage in a slurry of fat and brain. A pairing every future chef will politely decline. Smoke joins the recipe, threading through fibers to make them more water-resistant and less appetizing to mold and insects. The result is a hide that hangs soft instead of sulking into stiffness. When you hold it up, the wind seems less smug. Quirky tidbit that still works: a smear of red ochre mixed with fat doesn't just look good. It can shield skin from sun, wind, and bugs. You stripe your cheeks in a shade we'll call Pleistocene terracotta and pretend it's purely functional while enjoying the eyebrow smiles it earns around camp. Later, you rub a little rendered fat on thread before sewing to help it glide through. Not glamorous, but then neither is frostbite. Light joke number 1, runway ready, is anything you can run in. Historians still argue whether Neanderthals tailored close-fitting clothing like yours, or relied more on wrapped capes and simple ties, and whether true fitted garments track with the appearance of eyed needles, or arrived earlier through awls and clever lacing. They also debate whether the first fancy trimming beads, fringes, contrasting patches signals status group identity, or simply the eternal human urge to look like you meant to leave the cave that way. Your solution is practical. Make it warm first, then let it flirt with style. The needle itself feels like a spell you can hold. You carve it from bird bone so thin it seems to hum when you breathe. An eye at one end, a keen point at the other, and suddenly edges meet where they're told. You cross-stitch a seam fold, a hem tack, a gusset under an arm, so you can throw a spear without teaching the garment new vocabulary. Thread is sinew split and twisted, or bast cord spun fine. Waxed with fat, it behaves. Each pass is a tiny promise that tomorrow you'll still be warm. You inventory pieces the way later centuries inventory closets. Footwear first, because warm toes outvote elegant shoulders in every honest pull. You weave sandals with bast, line them with fur for winter, and dream of future socks with the wistfulness of a poet. Leg wraps spiral upward, tied by cords that know their job. A tunic of stitched hide gets a slit neck and a laced side so layers can play nice. A hood solves what wind loves most: cold ears. Gloves more. Like mitts, a pouch for fingers, a thumb that gets its own room, and a string so you don't lose them to the enthusiastic mischief of weather. Fire tags in like a loyal teammate. You heat treat bone to ease carving dry fibers, where smoke teaches patience, and singe loose hairs from hides with the same quick hand you use to rescue bread on a stick before it becomes avant-garde charcoal. The hearth is your sewing machine's foot pedal, and your clothes dryer's patient cousin. When a spark flies, you learn why aprons exist. You also learn the difference between fashion hole and new patch required, and the camp gets very good at pretending they don't notice your limited edition burn mark. Light joke number 2, one-of-a-kind couture courtesy of the fire. Baskets join the ensemble because pockets are still a rumor. You twine flexible branches and stitched plant fibers into containers with personalities, one for tubers, one for tools, one that insists on carrying honey and therefore smells like ambition. A net bag crosses your chest and becomes a soft exoskeleton portable storage that shifts with your steps and borrows your rhythm. Later, a braided belt becomes a place to hang a flake blade, a striker pouch, and the tiny bone tube that guards needles like sleeping minnows. You borrow from the river too. Fish skin scraped thin and dried turns into a surprisingly tough patch material, glossy in a way that makes children stare at their reflections and practice serious faces. In wetter climates, you stitch capes from overlapping leaves as a one-storm solution, fast, to make faster to compost. In colder ones, you escalate to layered fur with the hair turned inward, which feels like hugging a small, agreeable cloud. A little loop sewn inside the hem becomes your drying hook. You hang the garment where heat is friendly but not greedy, so damp turns into comfort instead of crisp. A side quest in I Wear Bright Snow will blind you if you let it. You pare a sliver of antler, carve a narrow slit, and tie it across your face, an ancient snow goggle that shrinks the world into manageable brightness. It looks mildly ridiculous until you realize you can still see tomorrow. Then it looks like wisdom with a strap. To match, you rub a whisper of ash under your eyes like athletes of the long winter. The wind takes a number and waits its turn. Mainstream fact, broadened textiles rarely survive, but impressions of woven fabrics press into ancient clay, and strands of twisted fibers turn up in caves and shelters, hinting that Looms' grandparents' simple frames, weighted warps, belong to deep time. A single fragment of twisted cord can rewrite how early you imagine string nets and bags. Once thread exists, clothing stops being one invention. It becomes a braided family of techniques traveling together. Debate crowds back in with a gust. Historians still argue whether clothing first spreads mainly because of cold stress, biting insects, or social modesty rules that arrive later and retroactively pretend they were always here. You shrug and pull your hood closer. Cold and bugs vote early and often, but the grin from a well-cut seam moves the needle to fashion and function have been roommates since the first stitched hem. You finish by customizing fringe along a hem so it dries faster and doesn't wick water upward, a little beadwork that catches firelight and says, "This is ours," and a reinforced patch where a spear butt rides your shoulder. You notch the belt for a better fit after supper, then remember supper and loosen it again. Someone compliments your hood. You offer to trade for the shell beads that have been jingling like tiny wind chimes all day. Networks begin with vanity as often as necessity. Evening focuses the lesson. A child leans against you and counts seams with a fingertip, then falls asleep halfway to 10. You hang damp things downwind of the fire and lay boots by the warm ash, not on it because the difference between toasty and crispy is one absent-minded story too long. You set the bone needle back in its tube thread tucked like a sleeping snake. Tomorrow will ask for repairs, a new belt loop, a patch where a thorn told a joke. That's fine. Clothing isn't finished. It's ongoing. Before sleep, you remember the first night you tried to hide cold, unsoftened, and how it rustled like a bad idea. Now everything you wear is dialogue between skin and wind, between fiber and fire, between what the world throws and what you send back, stitched together. You bank the coals, adjust the hood, and drift with the small pride of someone who tailors weather into something that fits. You set off before the wind chooses sides, reading the damp as if it left you a letter. Grass leans, grit swirls. A beetle writes 3 tiny commas across the path. You add your own punctuation heel-toe, a pause where you taste the air for rain. The camp dwindles into a rumor behind you, and the world turns into a corridor stitched from rivers, coasts, and memory. Travel isn't a leap. It's a sentence you finish slowly, one careful word at a time, resisting the urge to shout the ending just because the horizon looks like a mouth. Mainstream fact walks beside you with long, patient legs. People disperse far out of Africa in pulses across tens of thousands of years, angling along shorelines and savannas overland, through corridors like Beringia, when sea levels fall, and by water to places that never touch the continent, reaching Sahul. Ancient Australia and New Guinea requires sea crossings, even at the lowest tides, so watercraft and teamwork are not optional extras, but tickets at the gate. Later, the Americas receive travelers, by routes scholars map erase and redraw, as new dates and coastlines rise from mud and math. Your trailcraft keeps you honest. You follow rivers because rivers follow themselves and generously carry drinking water, fish reeds, and gossip. Reed beds announce where the bank softens for a crossing. Drift patterns mutter about currents that will take your bundle where you'd rather not go. You step on stones and deadfall when you can, leaving footprints only where the story will wash away. Even with the best sneaking prints happen, and sometimes they last like the ancient trackways pressed into volcanic ash or lakebed silt that later harden into stone diaries, small miracles that let future eyes meet your stride. Quirky but useful kit item for the road, a hollow ostrich eggshell plugged with grass and pitch riding in a net like a moon in a hammock. It becomes your canteen across dry country, light, strong, and faintly glamorous. You mark the shell with scratches that mean, "Don't drink me unless the next water is a rumor," which is almost always when you want it most. Light joke number 1. You call the scratches hydration emojis and pretend they make you drink slower. They do not. Historians still argue whether the earliest American arrivals slip south, mainly by an interior ice-free corridor that opens late, or by skimming the Pacific coast on a kelp highway, harvesting tide pools, shellfish, and seaweed, while small boats hop between beaches. They also debate the precise timing down to a handful of chilly millennia, because dates move as fast as shorelines do, when ice sheets sulk and oceans change their mind. You walk without picking a side because the only rule that never flips is move when moving pays. Travel like sowing begins before your feet. You plan by listening. At a gathering place where river meets river shells, change hands with obsidian, and stories trade owners. Someone sings a path in a voice that knows where the stars step at dusk. Someone else traces hills on your palm knuckles, for peaks, creases for valleys. You sleep on it. In the morning, you can feel the song under your ribs, a line you can follow, even when clouds hide the map taped to the sky. Night throws you a gift. The big animal, call it a dipper, a plow, a canoe, drags a trail across the dark that points you like a slow silver finger. A crescent moon sets you a compass. You can eat the lit horn that cups the dusk lines up with the sun you outwalked. Over water, the swell rolls like a language. Birds commute to land at last light. A smear of cloud on the horizon might be an island rehearsing its silhouette. You file the hints together until they stop being hints. Light, joke number 2. Your navigation app is called Look Harder. 0 battery issues so far. Mainstream fact has more pages than one book can hold. Laetoli's footprints record an older kind of walking long before your species, while later trackways in deserts and lakebeds show children sprinting beside adults, people carrying loads, and even playful detours that feel like Tuesday. Beringia isn't just a bridge. At glacial low stands, it's a wide grassy country, the Mammoth Steppe, where herds and humans browse the same long miles under hoarded sky. None of this feels like a march. It feels like seasons strung together across bigger rooms. The coast provides a pantry that refills itself with the moon. Kelp forests drowse offshore fat with fish that don't mind if you are not a genius, but do mind if you are noisy. Tide tables live in your bones. Full moon equals higher water. New moon equals a different hunt. You build reed bundles into a raft that is not stylish, not fast, but deeply committed to floating. A child rides in the front and shouts sound effects. An elder sits in the back and is the reason you arrive upright. You land dry everything that resents salt, and remember that sea spray tells the truth about wind long before the wind does. Your ankles learn continents the way your tongue learns new names slowly by repetition, with a few stumbles that make surprisingly good jokes later. You try to keep to high ground and windward edges where insects are lazy. Remember the ash-trick charcoal stripes keep the biter's enthusiasm at a reasonable temperature while you camp near water in summer. You carry an ember in a bark cup, so the next morning is not a negotiation with soggy tinder and cold fingers. Migration is logistics pretending to be romance. The pretend works because you're good at both. Historians still argue whether early voyagers use formal star maps or narrative songlines, runways of remembered verses that anchor each hill bend and spring to rhythm and rhyme. They also debate whether long crossings, those ancient pushes to Sahul, are deliberate expeditions with cargo and social planning, or many small drifts that accumulate people by luck. Your stance is simple. Nobody moves across an ocean by accident, often enough to populate a continent. You plan, you hedge, you bring extra cordage, and you tell jokes that keep the boat brave. Rumor for you is a technology. You hear of red stone that writes on skin, of shells that tinkle like tiny storms of a valley where the wind never quite wins. You go because the rumor might be true, and because the going itself makes you more able to go. The group shifts members like a braided river marriage ties, fostered children, seasonal friends who return with the geese. You learn new words for the same hill and store them like spare flint, different edges for different bark. Quirky field hack that saves a day to mark a safe crossing. You twist a little braid of grass and hang it at shoulder height on a branch that leans just so. Later, your people see it and smile without stopping, because moving fast while still communicating is how a trail stays. A trail when rain edits the ground. Light. Joke number 3. You call it prehistoric signage. The font is Leaves Sands. Evening folds around a new campsite that smells like hellebore and wet stone. You bank the fire with a confidence borrowed from last week's lessons, hang the eggshell moon where hands won't knock it, and set shoes by the warm ash. Not on it burned Hunle, do not improve tomorrow. A child counts stars until numbers run out, and wonder does the rest. Someone hums the day backward, so you can carry it forward the bend where you saw the otter. The shell that was so round, it nearly rolled away the bluff that looked like a sleeping bison if you squinted kindly. The song becomes a line on the inside of your skull. In the morning, your feet will find it again. You sleep near your prints, which the night will soften into suggestions. Some will last, mostly won't. It's fine. The point was never to autograph the continent. The point is to arrive where the air tells a new story, and to arrive with enough of yourself left to listen. You curl around the warm breath of the fire and the warmer rumor of distant waves, which if all goes to plan will be tomorrow's road and next week's food. Beyond them, maybe an island. Beyond that, a bigger map you'll draw with your body, one step one crossing one campfire rumor at a time. You duck into the hill, the way a river ducks under ice, carrying daylight in a small fist. The entrance pinches your shoulders and scuffs your pack. Cool breath rolls out smelling of limestone damp clay, and something older than either silence. You press a lump of fat into a shallow stone dish, twist a wick of fibrous bark, and coax it alight from last night's ember. The flame answers with a steady butter-colored oval. It's not bright, but it is loyal, and it turns the cave wall into a page that's been waiting centuries for your handwriting. The first touch is with your fingers, because tools are just longer fingers anyway. Your nail scores damp calcite. Powdered white collects along a line that curves into the hip of an animal you've only ever chased at a distance. You grind red ochre on a flat stone. Remember that Pleistocene terracotta you wore as windblock and bug shield, and it blossoms into dust that smells faintly of iron and rain. A splash of water, a smear of fat, and the paste becomes paint that clings where you tell it to go and refuses where you hesitate. The cave, like a good editor, underlines your choices and ignores your excuses. Mainstream fact glows as steadily as your lamp people make art deep in time. Hand stencils sprayed around fingers bloom on walls from Europe to Indonesia. Some in Sulawesi date to at least 40,000 years ago. Europe's Chauvet and later Lascaux vault with lions, aurochs, and horses that still seem to breathe when the flame wobbles, while in southern Africa and Australia rock shelters carry painted hunters and trance-stiff figures. Scratch back farther still, and you find engraved ochre and shell beads from sites like Blombos, early hints that minds enjoy pattern. As much as protein, you do not paint from memory alone. You paint from listening. A palm on the limestone tells you where the wall is cool, where it sweats. A lamp held low at an angle turns bumps into muscles, and the shadow of a crack into the backline of a bison. You are not drawing an animal onto the wall. You're inviting the rumor of an animal out of it. Light joke number 1. The art director is the torch. You just follow notes. You mix black with charcoal scraped from last night's avant-garde bread and manganese scraped from a vein that stains your fingers moonless. White, red, brown, black. The palette of geology. And suddenly, the cave owns a herd. Quirky technique with a surprisingly modern vibe. You load pigment into your mouth, fit a hollow bird bone between your lips, and spray instant airbrush. Your hand becomes a stencil, fingers spread. A cloud of red dust drums the rock, and when you pull away, your absence is the picture. Children press their hands beside yours, smaller, eager. Later, someone will measure finger proportions and realize a lot of this art includes women and kids. Later still, you'll remember the giggle that shook the lamp and almost edited your masterpiece into a smoke stain. Historians still argue whether the deepest galleries are sanctuaries for a few initiated travelers or living rooms that everyone visits when the weather scowls. They also debate function hunting magic rehearsed with charcoal choreography star maps and seasonal cues snuck into spots and lines teaching tools for the youngest trackers, or simply the glorious unnecessary pleasure of making the world echo what's inside your head. You keep painting because the debate will end in supper either way. The acoustics help you decide where to stand. Clap. The echo comes back low and round, good place for bison. Tap with a flake. The sound tightens horse heads like that crisp edge. Some researchers will later notice that the richest image clusters sit where echoes behave as if the stone itself wants to sing. You don't call it acoustic mapping. You call it this place feels right, and your shoulders drop as certainty threads through your hands. Your lamp is a small, demanding sun, and it drinks fat faster than you'd like. You carry spares, stone cups, bone spoons, because darkness is not a vibe. It is a decision you do not make. Soot collects on the ceiling in velvety blooms. Fallen droplets of waxy fat freeze like tiny moons where the wick flicked a thought too far. You find a blackened lamp someone left here seasons ago, a shallow limestone oval with a char ring, a message that says, "We were you, and we came prepared." Mainstream fact feeds the fired imagination in Lascaux. And elsewhere, lamps, pigment grinders, and scaffolding. Mop stains suggest sustained projects, not quick scrawls on your way to check the weather, but planned sessions with gear assistance and a layout. In some caves, dots cluster and lines ladder in sequences that repeat across chambers, a visual hum that some interpret as proto-notation. Even if you don't solve the code, your hands learn the beat of it. You soften the edge of a horse muzzle with a spit-slick fingertip. The creature tilts into softness and seems to sniff. You cross-hatch a mane with a burin because the wall's crust resists paint here as if it wants to be combed instead of washed. Where the stone bulges, a bison's shoulder swells, and this is the trick you'll never tire of. The cave was already a bison. You're just convincing everyone else to see it. Light joke number 2. When the wall collaborates this hard, you give it half the credit and all the blame. Fringe feeling, but plausible. You grind a hint of plant resin into the paint so it fixes better. And for certain motifs, you add a whisper of glimmer from crushed calcite so it scatters lamplight like frost. When you back up, the animal seems wet with breath. You leave a little negative space where the rock color carries the shine because restraint is a tool too, and pigments are a finite argument. Historians still argue whether some zigzags, chevrons, and ladder marks encode rivers' migration routes or rituals that later become performances under open skies. They argue whether the thunderous antlered silhouettes are specific herds or cloud animals that teach courage in rooms where storms cannot reach. They argue whether trances built on drumbeat breathwork or bitter roots power, the hand that draws a man with a bird head and an aurochs with too many spears to be about supper. You nod at all of it and add one more line because arguing less and painting more is how this room got good. You turn from the wall to the portable engraved bone with a swirling line that turns corners as if following a melody. A pebble rubbed smooth and painted with a stripe that makes children try to roll it just right. A pendant cut from a seashell. Your aunt traded for 3 winters ago. These ride with you and announce softly which camp you belong to. A bead clicks against another bead. The sound becomes a handshake you can hear. Trade will carry these far, save that thought for section 11. But tonight, their job is nearer. Keep the group coherent in the dark. A child asks if the animals can walk off the wall. You answer the way your elders did, only if you forget to feed the lamp. Everyone laughs, the kind that releases your ribs. Light joke number 3. You add union rules, say they also get 2 grazing breaks and a salt lick. Then you prove that pictures move when light does shield and reveal the flame so the bison's shoulder breathes. Lift the lamp so the horse rears. Lower it so the dots become falling snow. The room shifts. The air gains a story. Mainstream fact returns with a clue you can feel in your forearm. The mix of charcoal sketching, ochre painting, and incision with stone edges shows a layered process. Draft, commit, refine. In several caves, superimposed images stack like palimpsests, month over year over generation. The wall, in other words, remembers. You respect that by never cleaning someone else's old line. You harmonize with it, or shift over the way your voice in a nighttime song tucks under another's melody, instead of wrestling it. You leave sign without autograph. A little hand stencil, low for a toddler to find later and gasp, "That's mine." A row of dots that only your band reads as Riverbend where the willow leans. An animal with a notch in its ear, like the one you nearly caught last spring. Personal, but only if you were there. You pack the lamps, stir the soot into a small ball for later drawing, and press a pinch of red into a crack, so the cave keeps a piece of your day. On the way out, your skin brings cave cool to the sun, like a message that made it through. Back in the wind, you blink until colors climb back into the world. Your fingers are red and black. Your mouth tastes like iron and smoke. Your eyes are full of animals that are exactly where they always were and exactly where you put them. You step into light with the quiet glee of someone who knows tomorrow the camp will come down to see, and someone will hold a lamp and whisper as if the pictures could spook. You won't correct them. The whole point is to be a little spooked and a lot stitched together by what you can make in darkness, with a steady flame, a good wall, and a handful of earth. You wake to a small foot in your ribs and a bigger laugh at your expense camp alarm clocks, come in 2 sizes. You slide the foot back under its blanket wrap and pass a warm stone from the hearth into the bundle so the morning doesn't startle anyone into tears. Childcare here isn't assigned like a chore chart. It swirls like smoke. A cousin carries the toddler to the berry shrubs because her hands are free today. An uncle with a patient voice braids cordage and a 6-year-old's confidence at the same time. You move through it all the way. Bees move through flowers on an itinerary that looks chaotic from the outside and obvious from the inside. Mainstream fact sits down beside you with its mug of steam in foraging societies. Babies often ride not just on a mother's back, but on a village of shoulders. Alloparenting, shared care by aunties, older siblings, grandfathers, best friend, not technically related turns, one tired pair of arms into many rested ones. The grandmother effect, shows up like a secret superpower. Post-reproductive elders who gather food keep fires steady and tell weather sense stories correlate with more surviving grandchildren. You see it daily when an elder calms a fussy infant by humming the sunrise into them, a tune older than your tent. Your sling is a strip of softened hide with a knot that knows 3 positions: side carry for nattering, front carry for napping, and back carry for sprinting away from bad decisions. You feed the baby a mash of roasted tuber and a thumb smear of honey. Yes, you're careful. Yes, the elders have opinions and watch their eyelids swing like slow doors. The camp hums. One person scrapes a hide. Another coaches the awkward miracle of first steps over a line of pebbles. 2 kids practice with toy throwing sticks that could not, in fairness, alarm a lizard. Light joke number 1. The lizards file a complaint anyway on principle. Politics looks nothing like a palace and exactly like breakfast. Meat from yesterday's small antelope reappears as a pot of stone-boiled stew, portioned without ceremony, into bowls that orbit clockwise. Remember that traffic rule from earlier and pause where need is obvious. A mother just weaned larger ladle, a hunter limping from a thorn. Extra fat is ointment you eat. Reputation oils the spoon. If someone hoards, the camp's humor turns barbed. Careful, he's saving that for the next ice age. Laughter in this ecosystem is both kindness and correction. Quirky tidbit that holds the group together. Nitpicking, literally combing hair and hunting for lice, migrates from hygiene to social glue. Fingers that check hair also check in on feelings. Conversation flows. Arguments soften and children nap across any lap that currently belongs to the friendliest comb. Smoke from the fire helps too. Remember ash as mosquito armor. Today the hearth adds pest control to its resume. A little smudge on brows and cuffs smells like you belong here, and bugs take the day off. Historians still argue whether pair bonds arise mainly from meat-sharing childcare partnership or sheer logistical brilliance. You carry the eggshell canteen. I'll carry the gossip and how variable marriage patterns were in deep time. Bride service shows up in some bands. A new partner spends a season or 3, helping the in-laws, strengthening ties one chopped log at a time. In other groups, residence after marriage zigzags. Matrilocal, one generation, patrilocal, the next. Flexible like a river choosing the least drama-prone bank. You participate cheerfully in whichever system comes with better stews because your principles are noble and your stomach is persuasive. The camp handles conflict the way it handles fire's bank. It don't blow on it. If someone boasts too loudly about a successful hunt, the elder chorus insults the meat, a leveling custom that keeps egos from growing antlers. That tiny thing. We'll need a microscope to find the marrow. Everyone smirks. The hunter shrugs. Status resets to breathable. If tempers still spike, there's a pre-approved ritual of sulking walks and chore swaps. Your job today? Fetch water. Their job sit where the wind can cool opinions. When all else fails, the ultimate vote is with your feet. Camp's fission and fuse and a few tents moving upriver is sometimes the cleanest compromise. Light joke number 2. The minutes of the meeting read, resolved. We will be less annoying separately. Mainstream fact, sturdy as cordage hunter-gatherer politics, skew egalitarian with influence flowing through skill. Generosity age, and the number of times you've kept your cool during thunderstorms, not through permanent offices. Leaders emerge situationally. The best navigator in fog, the calmest voice when a leopard rehearses democracy at the edge of camp and step back afterward. Gossip acts as a free press with better distribution than your last basket. Who shared, who shirked, who told the honey guide thank you, like they meant it. Reputation is your resume. Jokes are the cover letter. Consistency is HR. You notice how childcare doubles as talent scouting. The uncle who cannot tell a straight story without tripping over his own plot is astonishingly good at teaching patience to a 5-year-old with rock-throwing ambitions. The teen who rolls eyes like marbles, shapes perfect cordage, and will make nets so beautiful the fish will volunteer. The grandmother who remembers a dry year's taste by the color of dust also remembers 3 lullabies in 3 languages. A portable diplomacy kit that prevents turf disputes over prime shade. Fringe-feeling practice, probably older than the last 3 fashion dream councils. At breakfast, someone shares a strange dream wolf with a fish's tail river running backward, and the group treats it like weather to be read. Maybe today you skip the ford where the current seemed sulky yesterday. Maybe you bring extra cordage. Even the skeptics listen, because dreams are good at packaging anxieties into manageable puzzles. And puzzles are good at making you feel prepared. No one claims prophecy. Everyone agrees it's handy to say out loud what your gut already knew. Historians still argue whether deep-time foragers leaned more toward strict monogamy, easy serial bonds, or webs of partnership that scrambled our modern labels. They also debate how often men provisioned mates and infants versus looking flashy, with big risky hunts that feed many, but not predictably. You watch one father rock a colicky baby while another trades beadwork for tubers, and think the answer is often depending which is not satisfying to charts, but is very satisfying to lunch. The camp's map is political theater disguised as interior design. Hearths space themselves at friendly distances, enough privacy to nap, enough proximity to borrow an ember without switching into please voice. The elder's shelter sits where breezes edit smoke. The water carriers camp closer to the path. The toolmaker prefers the windbreak of a fallen log that also happens to be a stage for evening stories. Lines of traffic create accidental committees. Who walks past whom, how often, and with what loads becomes a slow-motion poll you can read if you sit still with a basket that needs mending. Trade rehearses here before the big exchanges of Section 11. A shell bead finds a new owner because a child fell in love with its clink. A scraper trades for the lesson of a knot. A favor today. Watch my toddler while I check the rabbit line returns as smoked fish next week, bringing with it a debt so pleasant, neither of you names it. The currency is attention. The interest rate is laughter. Default is rare and memorable. You remember Section 3's honey diplomacy? And Section 4's sewing triage when afternoon frays everyone's nerves. Sugar and repairs save friendships. You bribe a tired child with a honeyed tuber coin patch, a neighbor's leg wrap before it becomes a tripping prophecy, and appoint the diplomat, the famous stirring stick to keep the stew from sticking, while 2 cousins negotiate who gets the last decent spear shaft. Light joke number 3. The diplomat's foreign policy is keep things moving and nobody burns. Mainstream fact slips. One more log on the fire language for kin is famously specific in many small-scale societies. Words to mark older and younger siblings, cross and parallel cousins. Joking partners you're supposed to tease and avoid partners you're supposed to politely avoid. These categories steer marriage choices and keep genetic bottlenecks at bay without anyone using the phrase genetic bottleneck over soup. You follow the rules mostly because the jokes land better when you do, and your aunt's eyebrow can restart winter. Evening returns the soft parliament. Songs tune the day into something shareable. A toddler steals a drum and invents a rhythm that accidentally matches the footfalls of people coming home. Somehow the song keeps going after the drum is rescued because good ideas belong to whoever carries them. The elder who insulted the meat earlier tells a story that lifts the hunter's chin without lifting it too high. Someone leans into your shoulder in the casual way that means the group has decided you're safe tonight, and you feel your ribs widen like a house accepting another lamp. Before sleep, you pass the baby to a different set of arms, because tomorrow, that person will be down by the river, and the baby should get used to the smell of water and reeds. You bank the fire with ash, the same ash that keeps bugs and politics from biting too hard, and lay your head on a rolled hide that still faintly remembers the animal it was. The night hums with 100 small social agreements. Who watches first? Who sings second? Who wakes the friend who dreams too deep? You float on them like a raft made of promises sturdy, because so many hands tied the knots. You start the day by reading the ground like headlines. quiet, serious, ready for whatever shows up. Grass lies combed in one direction, sedge stems are bitten off at knee height, and a puddle inside a round print still ripples. You fan the air and meet the woolly rumor of mammoth. That is not your cue to play hero. It is your invitation to edit the plan and practice tasteful retreat. Light joke number 1. Your safety manual mostly says, don't be where the heavy thing wants to be. Mainstream fact wears a shaggy coat for tens of thousands of years. Humans share land with mammoths, woolly rhinos, steppe bison aurochs, giant ground sloths, cave bears, and dramatic cats. The overlap shows in cut-marked bones, interleaved footprints, and on the steppe, winter shelters, framed with piled mammoth bones. Wind-wise architecture that lets the gale talk and move on. Coexistence, not constant combat, is the baseline. You study a churned patch where a tusk has tilled the turf into warning curls. A calf's small ovals ride beside a matron's crater. In damp sand, you sketch a new root skirt. The marsh, avoid the willow braid where trails knot into ambush geometry. Keep a ridge between you and the family you do not intend to meet today. There is bravery. There is foolishness. The art you practice lives between them and is spelled Distance. Quirky tidbit that truly helps communal latrines. In some regions, giant ground sloths return to the same dung sites again and again, building mounds you can smell before you see. You give those places a wide berth, not just for hygiene, but because the owners may come back in a mood no one needs to audition for. Dried dung, however, is a friend. It smolders as mosquito armor rides in a clay-lined cup as a traveling ember and turns unruly wind into cook-fire patience. Remember ember banking under ash. Same principle, portable. Historians still argue whether the late Pleistocene wave of big animal extinctions tilts mostly toward rapid human overhunting climate. Whiplash as ice-retreated disease, or a braided combination that changed by continent. They also debate whether the famous mammoth bone houses reveal specialized hunters building with many kills, or thrifty neighbors recycling what winter delivered to a bend in the river. You keep your vote private and your footprint small. You have to live here after the discussion ends. The herd path ahead looks like a road because it is 1 centuries of hooves tamped into a sentence the land keeps repeating. You cross it the way a cat crosses a parade head-low calculation, pretending you are invisible while absolutely not being invisible. 10 heartbeats, then you guide the party through willow fringe, where your prints will melt when the stream overflows tonight. Your eggshell canteen bumps your ribs moon in a net, reminding you that dry ground is often the safest when giants visit. Light. Joke number 2, stealth rating -2. Fieldcraft has its party tricks. A soft bison huff, curious, not angry, tells you whether the herd nearby is browsing or bolting. You use it seldom, and only with wind that carries your caution ahead of you. Ravens are gossipy neighbors. If they spiral with drummer enthusiasm, something is happening, calving a kill or an argument to watch from upwind and uphill. By midday, the wind swings and the smell of crushed sedge and warm damp hair rolls past closer now. You detour onto a gravel bar where prints tell Tintin, edges fresh sand, collapsing water dark in the bowls. You step into your own tracks from a minute ago to shrink the map. You're leaving a trick you learned the day you realized you were not just a tracker, you were trackable. Remember hand stencils in caves. Out here, your signatures wash themselves. You break behind a veil of shrubs, keeping silhouettes low. Dried meat softens. A tuber coin lacquered with honey turns planning into dessert. Contingencies run like lullabies. Where to climb if a bluff charge auditions you, which deadfall offers cover that isn't a trap. How to puff ash like a silent shout if you need to signal without teaching the valley your vocabulary. Light joke number 3, your emergency plan has 2 steps. 1, number 2, faster. Fringe but memorable. Someone swears a dab of mammoth fat on boots keeps them flexible and water sly. You recall it also makes every dog in camp worship your ankles, so you return to rendered deer and call it science. On the other hand, giant bones become tools. You trust sled runners that don't sulk, awls that don't snap handles, that sit honest in the hand. You don't waste giants. You collaborate with their leftovers when weather or chance offers them. Afternoon slides toward gold. Across the flats, a herd moves like a gray river, with islands of curved light where tusks catch sun. You watch from a distance that feels healthy for all parties. A calf stumbles, recovers, and is nudged back into line by a wall of antes. You recognize the choreography. Your own camp moves like that when storms gather elders, at the center children buffered by patient scouts, keeping watch at the edges. Kin is a strategy. Whatever the species, on the walk back, you tag a safe route with a little braid of grass. The font is still. Leave sands and kick loose gravel over a shortcut you do not want to repeat. Not every future needs your past. A teenager asks whether you'll ever hunt something that big. You answer, maybe when the plan is older than the idea and the hill agrees. Camp receives you with old warmth. You shape the air into tusks and stamp the dust into footprints as you tell the story. The fire listens like a good friend with heat and a tiny hiss at your mistakes. Dinner roasts. Nobody insults the meat because modesty taxes were paid to prudence. A child practices a mammoth trumpet that sounds like a shy trumpet inventing confidence, which is exactly enough. Before sleep, you bank the coals under ash, set boots by warm earth, not on it, and listen to the soft argument of owls. Living with giants is not about being the biggest or the bravest. It is about fluency, the quiet language of distance, timing, and respect. You roll onto your side press, your palm to ground that still remembers a heavy foot, and feel comforted by a crowded world of other lives that want exactly what you do. A safe path, a drink of water, and tomorrow. Dusk eases in like a hand on your shoulder, and you answer with a note so low, it's almost a thought. Someone else finds the pitch and stitches theirs to yours. Two voices make a small bridge across the cooling air. A third voice hums from behind the stew pot, yes, stirred by the diplomat. Still a tireless statesman, and the camp rearranges itself around the sound, the way sparks rearrange around a breath. Rhythm is a net you throw over the evening. Everything that matters swims into it willingly. You start with the instrument you've been practicing since lungs, and courage first signed a treaty your voice. Work songs arrive as easily as breath. The seed grinder's circles set the tempo, the hide scraper's rasp adds a soft sand, and your syllables ride the groove, not poetry. At first, inventory reminders, jokes until repetition rounds them into verses that even sleepy minds can carry. You stitch in the counting for the rabbit snares and the warnings about the marsh, and because you are who you are, a line where the honey guide gets top billing. Light joke number 1. The bird's agent will be in touch about royalties. Mainstream fact clear as a held note. Bone flutes and whistles show up deep in time. At sites in the Swabian Jura of Germany, hollow bird bones and even carved mammoth ivory hold finger holes that still play after 40,000 years when coaxed by careful breath. Across a much later cave in France, a great seashell waits with its lip cut and a mouthpiece attached. When modern lungs try, it can 3 steady tones bloom like moons breaking the tree line. These aren't accidents. They're instruments, planned, tuned, and carried. You cradle your own flute, a vulture bone thinned by patience, holes burned and scraped rim, sealed with resin that still smells faintly of pine smoke and luck. It objected loudly for days, cracking if the fire was jealous, sulking, if the breath was wrong. Now warmed near the coals and cosseted like a fussy child, it answers with notes that feel like stepping stones over water. Children lean closer. Elders lean back with that look that says they remember the first time they learned a scale without learning the word scale. Percussion grows where hands are. Someone flips a skin over a hollow log and pulls it tight with sinew. A low drum wakes the ground and your shins hear it before your ears do. Another pair of sticks, one smooth one with notches, make a rasp that imitates insect wings and encourages the actual insects to mind their manners. Lithophones, the fancy word for stones that ring when you convince them to line up along the river terrace, each chosen for a different voice. You strike them with polite wood, not rude stone, and they answer with notes that carry across the water like silver fish. Quirky tidbit with a wind haircut. A flat carved slat on a cord, spin it fast, and it hums, then roars. You step away from curious ears, because this bull roar is not a toy on nights when the elders have called the quiet kind of gathering. The sound folds the valley into a single room. Sometimes it warns distant friends that you're close. Sometimes it warns distant strangers that you're not looking for company. And sometimes it is just a way to let the wind say hello in your language. Light joke number 2. You call it wireless, and the only plan is unlimited. Historians still argue whether music begins as a mating display, in Darwin's sense, virtuosity, as a peacock tail, an infant calming toolkit that moms and aunties refine into lullaby engineering, a coordination hack for rowing, grinding, marching, and hunting, or a happy byproduct of brains built for language that insisted on throwing a party. They also argue whether a famous perforated bare bone from a Slovenian cave is a Neanderthal flute, or the aftermath of a hyena with aggressive table manners. You nod along to all of it and keep the beat. Theories are lovely, but the soup tastes better when the camp breathes in time. You test how rhythm turns bodies into one machine. Grindstones that usually squeal in competition fall into a polite round. The pestle rises and drops in time with footfalls at the edge of camp. Even the stew bubbles on the offbeat like it took lessons. When the group needs to lift a heavy log for a windbreak, you count not with numbers, but with vowel sounds, long and round, the kind that tighten everyone's grip at the same moment without making the neighbors think you found a leopard. Walking songs pull miles under your feet, like thread through felt. Rowing chants on days when the river insists you borrow it make blades agree to enter and leave the water without drama. Your ear goes hunting for more voices in the landscape. A hollow root makes a whistle if you bully it gently. Ankle rattles from shells and seeds tell the feet where the hands are in the dark, and entertain a toddler who believes you make thunder. A gourd half full of pebbles becomes rain you can schedule. The clack of scapulae, 2 shoulder blades, kept for percussion, plays the role of castanets in a drama that requires less grace than enthusiasm. Light. Joke number 3, your band name is Cave and the Resonators. The tour is very local. Mainstream fact returns with a small soft truth. People bury the dead with beads and pendants, and sometimes those beads are ostrich eggshell discs strung into strands that tinkle softly when worn. Even before graves, the beads jingle by the fire when dancers turn. Sound becomes smellable. Memory smoke, honey ochre, and that polite clatter that says your people are nearby. Music is security as much as spectacle. Remember Section 6's cave acoustics, the spots that clap back in the right key. You sometimes carry the drum and the flute there on purpose. Paintings watch while you test echoes. A low bison wallow of a note blooms into something larger, and the dots along the ledge look almost like notation when your lamp shakes. You'll never prove it, and you don't have to. It's enough that the chamber says yes in a syllable you feel in your chest. Out under the sky, a stand of pines whispers on windy nights, in a pitch that pairs with your longest bone pipe, and the duet turns the dark from a question into a lullaby. Debate never fully sleeps. Historians still argue whether the circle of polished footprints around some hearths, records dancing, or just a lot of polite pacing while Stu teased everyone. They still argue whether certain carved notches on bone tally animals' moons or beats. They still argue whether the earliest ivory flutes travel with a particular symbol set, and whether that pairing means song tradition or someone with very strong opinions about branding. You listen amused. Then you soften a reed, adjust a hole with a Burns kiss, and watch an elder's eyebrow rise at the sweeter pitch. Empiricism meet applause. Night watch uses music like a lantern you can't drop. The first watcher hums the all-clear motif, a phrase only 3 notes long, impossible to panic to. The second watcher answers from the far side of camp. If the tune breaks you wake. If it lulls you doze. Babies turn toward it, the way seedlings turn toward rain. Your own eyelids drift like boats, but never quite beach, while the melody glides its quiet patrol. Fringe but plausible trick. You learned from a neighbor camp, a low shared hum before a group has to do something brave, the kind of brave where silence might let fear invent too many stories. The hum rubs the rough edges off. It doesn't make you fearless. It makes you coordinated, which is better. Later, you discover humming helps sore ribs from a clumsy climb. The vibration seems to argue with the ache until it gives up. You don't call it therapy. You call it singing where it hurts. Music keeps score kindly. The hunter who missed the shot gets the verse where the river was pretty and the rocks were slippery. The child who dropped the eggshell canteen moon in a net, poor thing, gets a chorus about the moon learning to swim and coming back shinier. The camp laughs without barbs. Status resets without meetings. By the time bowls orbit your set list has completed its other job, you remember the day together, so tomorrow's plan sits in everyone's bones. Toward the end, the tempo slackens. Drums turn to heartbeat, heartbeat, to breath, breath, to the soft brush of palms on hide. Someone sings in a language that never had a word for yesterday, but knows an entire grammar for remember. You add a quiet harmony. Your neighbor adds a third. The air grows a roof thick enough to keep the wind from rummaging through your thoughts. You bank the coals under ash. Of course you do, and lay the flute in its bark sleeve so resin won't sulk by morning. A shell rattle keeps time on its walk to sleep, and your own pulse joins obediently. Before dreams, you hear the last joke, the honey guide's agent again this time, demanding a better chorus, and the last debate whether the bull roarer scares wolves or just impresses them aesthetically. You smile into the dark. Warmth, rhythm, voices. Pictures asleep in the cave and stars rehearsing their old songlines over the ridge. You are carried to sleep by something older than language and perfectly fluent in comfort. If tomorrow needs courage, you have already practiced breathing together. Dawn arrives with the sound of someone pretending they didn't twist an ankle yesterday. You recognize the brave shuffle the way their eyes try to walk before their feet do. You put the fire back on speaking terms with the kettle. The diplomat does a quick stir because of course it does, and you breathe pine steam while laying out the quiet theater of fixing what the day scuffed. Your tool roll opens like a kind sentence. Thin flakes fire licked. Clean. A bone needle in its little tube sinew. Thread waxed with fat strips of bark softened to curve, and a lump of pitch that smells like a pine tree decided to be helpful forever. You start with water because every repair begins clean. The eggshell canteen moon in a net pours a small river into a bark bowl. You crumble dried leaves and bitter bark into it, willow and meadowsweet if you have them, poplar. If you don't, each leaf a stern ant with a heart of gold. The brew is truly deeply not delicious, which is how you know it will help. Light joke number 1 flavor profile notes. Do I really have to with a finish of fine? I admit it's working. Steam rises, ankles relax by suggestion. Mainstream fact sits down beside your patient and refuses to be impressed by modern smugness. People in deep time do medicine that leaves fossils arguing in our favor. Healed fractures show neat callus bands where bone knits after careful splinting. Skulls with trepanations round or ovoid windows, cut or scraped into bone, carry smooth regrowth at the edges. Proof that many patients survived the procedure long enough for the body to write still here in calcium. In one startling case, far away and long ago, even a major amputation shows long-term survival, which means someone managed pain infection and aftercare with a competence you can feel in your own hands as you tie a bandage. You splint the ankle with 2 bark shingles padded by soft moss, the good kind that doesn't sulk when pressed. Fast cordage wins in a tidy figure 8. One more loop, and the joint feels more opinionated about staying where it belongs. You show the owner a cane made from a forked branch thorn nubs, smoothed hand grip wrapped. The lesson is simple. Pain is not an enemy. It's a noisy consultant. You pay attention and renegotiate. Smells drift in like helpful ghosts. Juniper and sage on the coals make a smoke that tells biting insects to seek their fortunes elsewhere, and tells noses that cleanliness has entered the chat. Honey warms at the hearth's shoulder. You stir it with a twig until it moves like slow glass, then spread a thin shine over a shallow scrape. Honey is a stubborn ally, pulls moisture, frowns at bacteria, and makes everyone behave long enough for skin to remember how to close. You cap it with a leaf and a polite wrapping of thread. It looks almost ceremonial, which between us most good medicine does. Quirky but real trick from a neighbor camp, big ants as clamps. If a small straight cut gapes and you lack hands to hold it closed, you invite 2 soldier ants to bite across the seam. When their jaws lock, you pinch off the bodies and the heads stay like living staples until the job is done. You use it sparingly and never on places that bend, but when it works, it feels like you borrowed precision from a tiny scandalized god. Light joke number 2, union rules require you to thank the ant. Historians still argue whether plant medicines are intentional in the very deep past. Did Neanderthals chew bitter poplar for pain relief, or were those residues in ancient plaque just hitchhikers from something else they ate? They also argue whether trepanation began as emergency surgery for fractures as a migraine remedy, as ritual to let spirits draft, or as a multi-tool of sometimes yes to all of the above. You keep brewing, keep splinting, and keep your eyebrows neutral during debates, because the ankle in front of you would like results more than theories. Your kit crosses from nice to necessary when someone arrives cradling a forearm that took a lesson from a falling log. You clear the crowd with a voice that has nothing to prove. Fire kisses a flake edge for a moment, heat to etiquette, and you test the limb with gentleness that knows exactly where it hurts. The bone hasn't broken clean through. It's sulking, not shattered. 2 straight sticks, moss pads, bast ties. Then the clever part, a little windlass, a toggled stick through a loop that lets you fine-tune tension without rehearsing a shouting match. The diplomat listens from the stew impressed. You lay out the "we're going to be okay" talk, which is mostly logistics wearing kindness. Rest, then slow walking. Light work, then the kind that makes the arm feel useful without being heroic. Sleep by the hearth, so the heat sneaks in and oils the ache. Tomorrow, a poultice yarrow plantain may be chewed to wake the juices, though you will pretend you used a mortar because certain children are watching. You warn about swelling redness. Heat signs that the body is mad in unhelpful ways, and you do the quietly brave thing modern people write essays about. You ask 3 friends to check on this person at midday, and dusk whether they ask or not. Compliance is a community sport. Your tools know both sewing and medicine. The bone needle stitches not just tunics, but clean edges of a shallow gash where the scraper slipped last night. Thread runs smooth when rubbed with fat. The knot sits politely to one side. You sing while you sew, not loudly, not theatrically, just enough for breath to remember its job, and the patient matches it, because rhythm does half the work of courage. When the last knot tucks home, you paint a ring of diluted pitch around the seam for extra discouragement to would-be invaders, and you say no, heavy lifting like a spell. Mainstream fact returns with a sweet tooth. Beeswax and resin mixtures show up as adhesives and sometimes as dental helpers. There's a very old tooth out there with a beeswax filling, and you can feel the ingenuity in your molars. Toothpick grooves in ancient teeth tell of people who refuse to let dinner win. You keep a sliver of wood in your pouch for the same reason. Dignity starts where spinach ends. The clinic expands to include lungs. A child coughs with the dry, stubborn rhythm of a bad joke. You make a steam tent out of a hide, and a patient's patience splashing pine needles and thyme into a pot so vapor carries their sharper selves into small airways. You drum a gentle percussion on the back to loosen what wants to stay. The rhythm is a lullaby from Section 9 retooled. Night watch tunes become chess tunes. You hum into bones until they answer with softer breath. Fringe feeling practice, likely older than anyone's titles, charcoal and clay for upset bellies. A pinch of char with water binds certain mysteries and persuades them to exit with grace. Clay can calm a stomach that has opinions after a questionable berry adventure. You do not oversell. You do not underplay. You hand over the drink with the solemnity it deserves and a joke it also deserves. Light. Joke number 3. Side effects may include feeling better and complaining less. Historians still argue whether healer was ever a full-time role in bands this small, or a hat many people wore as needed grandmothers with plant libraries. Hunters who could set a wrist in the time it takes to tell a joke, bone workers who knew which edges to fear and which to trust. They also argue how knowledge traveled by apprenticeship with ceremony by gossip, with recipes by marriage with travel kits. You vote yes because your own training looks like a braid of all three. By afternoon, the clinic looks suspiciously like a picnic. Splinted ankle elevated on a rolled hide forearm, propped on a basket. Honey scrape airing in the breeze, cough child napping to pine. You scold the fire lovingly, bank the coals so water stays warm but not bossy, and line up your jars, resins, dried leaves, ground charcoal, ochre for marking dosages on a stick. You scratch 2 small leaves after sunrise and 1 pinch when the moon clears the ridge into a tally that even sleep-deprived friends can read. Evening brings the soft politics of gratitude. The stew gets an extra stir. Bowls tilt a little deeper toward the healer and the helper of the healer, and the kid who fetched water without being asked. No one thanks you with speeches. They thank you by remembering your instructions and by making sure your blanket finds the warm side of the hearth. Reputation is medicine, too. Before sleep, you check the ankle check, the arm check, the cough check. Your own breath. You wash your hands in ash and water. Remember that gentle gritty soap and oil your fingers with a smear of fat to keep small cracks from becoming big sermons. You tuck the bone needle back in its tube like a bright idea back in its box. The night smells faintly of juniper and honey and cooled pitch, the clinic's perfume. Somewhere in the dark, a patient laughs at a joke you didn't hear, which is the oldest discharge note on record. You lay down knowing tomorrow will chip someone's tooth blister, someone's heel, and test someone's courage. That's fine. You have teas, splints, smoke song, and a camp that remembers instructions. Medicine here is not a miracle. It's maintenance with kindness, skill braided to attention, and enough light jokes to keep fear from thinking it runs the place. You bank the coals and let the day close on a promise bodies want to heal, and you live in a group that helps them remember how. You arrive at the place the rivers agree on, where the bank flattens into a polite plaza, and smoke from 3 different camps stacks into a striped sky. No stalls, no signs, just blankets laid on sand. Hands that talk, and the bright clicking of beads that announces both fashion and economics. You drop your bundle scrapers with proud edges, a twist of sinew thread that behaves a lump of pine pitch, smelling like useful thunder. A small net of roasted tuber coins lacquered with honey. And you listen. Trade starts with ears. You learn people before you learn prices. The woman with the shell rattle walks like reeds in wind. The old man with the straight scar across his thumb sharpens without looking and never brags. The teen with the painted hood pretends to be bored and knows every gossip vector on this river. Gift. First, your grandmother taught a pinch of red ochre portable sunshine pressed into a palm, a tiny bone pendant for a child who stares heroically at your vulture bone flute. Reciprocity answers in kind, a smudge of resin that cures faster a new knot that refuses to untie even when boredom tries. Mainstream fact lays its samples on the blanket. Far-traveled things turn up, where feet alone don't explain them. Obsidian can be traced to its volcano by its chemistry and flakes from the same mountain sparkle in camps hundreds of kilometers away, evidence of down-the-line exchange where each camp passes a little onward. Seashells lie in graves far inland. Baltic amber strays south. Red ochre lumps identical to a distant quarry sit in caves where your lamp once sang to bison. Across Africa, strings of ostrich eggshell beads scatter like a breadcrumb trail of friendship networks, wide enough to stitch drought-prone families into a safety net that stretches across seasons. You roll a black glass core in your hand, feel its cold promise. The trader taps it. The ring is clean as a bell. You test the fracture with a tiny pressure flake, polite, reverent. The core answers like buttered lightning. You grin, which is the universal currency upgrade face. Light joke number 1. You attempt to look unimpressed for negotiating reasons and achieve almost serious for 2 seconds. In return, you offer a lump of especially silky pitch and a scraper whose bite draws admiring winces. The swap lands in that sweet spot where both of you suspect you got the better deal, which is how alliances taste. Quirky tidbit with excellent PR, some bands trade fire itself. A clay-lined cup rides home with a slow, smoldering dung coal babysat like a royal infant. You've done it. Remember the ember banking trick? But here it's ceremonial, the handoff marked with a joke and a song, so the ember feels welcome. Another portable treasure eggshell canteens, moons and nets, etched with designs that work like maker's marks. Scratches say, who gave it a tiny insurance policy against forgetful gratitude? Historians still argue whether the appearance of distant shells, obsidian and ochre means direct journeys by hardy specialists or networks of many small trades where objects hop camp to camp. They also argue whether bead size standardization hints at money-ish accounting, or simply fashion converging on what fingers and eyes prefer. Some see notched bones as lunar tallies, others squint and see inventory sticks. You breathe trade and let the stew settle the vote. Etiquette conducts half the orchestra. You never grab, you present. You do not insult the goods unless a close friend needs their ego deflated to market value. You praise the maker by asking how, and then learn. A twist of cordage here, a cleaner hafting shoulder there, a new way to build a fish weir with fewer arguments and more fish. Technology travels faster than feet. Cleverness spreads the way a chorus does. One person sings it true, the rest recognize themselves in it. You watch stories trade hands the same way ochre does. News moves as freight, where the herds angled last winter, where water stood long after the reeds browned, where a cough camped, and how pine steam and time sent it packing. You collect rumors like beads and string them into decisions. A cousin swears a new snare trigger costs half the swearing. You buy the lesson for 2 tuber coins, and later don't even miss the coins. Light joke number 2. You try to haggle the price down to 1 coin and a compliment. The seller wants 2 compliments. You pay in flattery. Everyone wins. Mainstream fact widens to people you haven't met. Ethnographers watching Kalahari foragers record Hakex Aaro delayed return gift exchange, where objects circulate as promises you can cash in for help later without ever saying loan. Other groups practice their own flavors, visiting marriages, fostered kids, long circuit dances, where songs and spouses both find fresh paths. You know the feel of it without the names. When drought trims generosity to the bone, these ties keep a bowl in your hand. You enter the shell aisle, which is also the gossip pit. Tapping tells quality. A small conch lip trimmed and beveled may be destined to become a trumpet that calls boats to land. A string of tiny oliva shells whispers of a coast your feet haven't tasted, but your ears now can. You trade a fine all-mammoth bone tough from that giant's legacy you respect for a strand that will jingle on your belt and remind you by sound that help lives beyond the next ridge. The trader slips an extra bead into your palm without ceremony. You nod like a person who understands footnotes. Fringe feeling but plausible a message stick, of your own nothing as formal as some later cultures, just a carved slat with paired incisions that prompt memory. Each notch pairs with a verse about a crossing or a promise. When you meet a friend 3 rivers away, the stick's scars jog both of you into the same story. You don't leave it with them. You leave a verse, and that travels fast enough. Historians still argue whether the earliest watercraft for open crossings were stitched plank geniuses, dugouts so sleek the river blushed, or bundles of reed that traded speed for stubborn flotation. They argue whether Upper Paleolithic gatherings at big river confluences were timed to fish runs, reindeer migrations, or eclipse gossip. They argue whether the geometric marks shared across distant caves are road signs or coincidence. Meanwhile, a woman from upriver shows you how to seal basket seams with melted beeswax so they stop flirting with leaks, and suddenly your day holds more soup and fewer complaints. Negotiations enjoy lunch. The diplomat stirs in public neutral calming, and bowls do their clockwise circuit. The pot contains contributions from 3 languages and 5 strategies. A scrawny fish becomes generous when kissed by a handful of wild leeks. Tubers from the far patch taste faintly of mineral spring and probably brag about it. Everyone tells a little origin myth about their ingredient because humility is for after seconds. Light. Joke number 3. You declare your contribution locally sourced wild water. You are applauded and not trusted. Accounting happens without numbers most of the time. The string of IOU beads you carry in your head clicks when someone passes you a packet of seeds from a plant that drinks fog. It clicks again when you show a child how to burnish a bead hole without cracking the disc. Debts settle as calmly as nights. A spare hide in a winter you didn't foresee a guided shortcut. When the sky loses its map, a place by the fire in a camp where your name travels faster than your feet. Evening leans in and the marketplace exhales into a circle. A dancer from downriver thumps a rhythm your stones want to answer. Your flute slides into a duet with a shell horn that has 3 honest moods and a 4th it reveals only to careful breath. Stories braid. You learn a new verse about a star rising when fish think it's time to be foolish. You trade your verse about using ash stripes to keep mosquitoes from rehearsing aria on your wrists, and 5 new people go home less itchy. You pack light, but leave heavy with ties. Obsidian core wrapped safe shell belt, newly talkative a bead from a child who decided you are their temporary cousin. The fire passes an ember to each traveling group, the ceremonial way that says, we expect you to come back. You tuck yours into a clay-lined cup banquet with a pinch of dung like a promise under a blanket, and smile at the way even a coal can be a contract. On the path away from the confluence, your feet read the ground as always, but your mind reads the network who to visit if the river sulks. Which song springs to the surface when a hill looks like the back of a sleeping bison? How many bowls of stew your new wax-sealed basket will carry before it starts telling jokes? The strand of eggshell beads at your waist clicks softly with each step, a percussion section keeping time for a road that exists mostly in memory and hospitality. No roads, no tolls, no customs posts, just braids of obligation and delight stretched over distance strong, because so many hands keep tugging them snug. You walk lighter than your pack suggests. Somewhere behind you, the market fades into smoke. Somewhere ahead, a friend of a friend is already rehearsing the smile they'll use when you appear with news, a notch stick and a moon in a net that means you remembered to bring water and welcome at the same time. You feel it before you decide it. The camp starts favoring one bend in the river over all the others. The wind behaves here. The bank sits high against spiteful floods. An afternoon sun lands like a friendly hand on cold shoulders. Staying a little longer becomes staying through a season, and staying through a season starts whispering ideas about walls. You begin with the wind, because walls that ignore wind become roofs that travel. A spine of stout stakes bites the galeside ground a ribcage the air must respect. You weave willow through the posts, wattle tightening like a basket tipped on its side, then smear daub over the weave clay from the bank-chopped grass. A scoop of dung, so the mix behaves, and a pan of yesterday's ash, because ash keeps volunteering for every job. the smell promises to mellow. Above the hearth, a smoke hole learns its manners, which means your relationship status with weather is it's complicated. Light. Joke number 1. Your fan club is the draft. Mainstream fact taps the soil. Archaeologists read circles of post holes, stone-lipped storage pits and hearths, layered neat as tree rings, place after place, used and reused. At Oolo on the Sea of Galilee, brush huts ringed an ancient lakeshore some 23,000 years ago. Their floors held fish bones, seeds, flint, and the normal mess of a lived-in morning. Far north on the steppe, mammoth bone houses frame shelters with tusks and jaws. Architecture you feel in your calves when you drag a rib to the right spot. Later in the Levant, Natufian hamlets lay down stone foundations, hearths and burials that hint at people staying long enough to let addresses make sense. Your hut earns more verbs. You lash a ridgepole with bast that sings when it's right, thatch the roof with reed bundles overlapped like fish scales, then tuck bark shingles along the storm edge. Comfort starts underfoot, packed clay tamped smooth, a mat of woven reeds, and a low sleeping platform of springy branches. A rolled hide at the head performs a humble miracle prehistoric memory foam. Your neck votes yes. The diplomat. The famous stirring stick gets its own peg by the hearth because kitchen politics require clear chains of command. Light joke number 2, chain of command equals one hook. Storage arrives like a new kind of time. You scoop a pit in the shade, line it with clay and basketry, then seal a flat stone lid with pitch, so snug its size. Tubers doze there, cool and smug. Fish learn patience as they curl above the smoke throat, and meat finds a winter cache in the permafrost kiss of a north-facing scree pocket. Seeds hang from roof poles in tight-lidded baskets, so mice need a circus audition before they steal. Ash works quietly again, sprinkled on floors and thresholds. It persuades pests to reconsider their life choices. Outside, a half wall catches the breeze, so smoke lifts and insects get confused about their schedule. A hide-drying rack leans at a cunning angle. A smoking frame sits where the draft is friendly. A little shelf by the door guards the eggshell canteen moon in a net because you've learned not to kick your water. Shell chimes dangle from the lintel, so arrivals announce themselves with music instead of surprises. Dogs choose the downwind wall and dream audibly. Puppies inventory every warm lap. Historians still argue whether semi-sedentary camps cluster first around wild cereal meadows, inviting heavier grinding stones and the temptation to linger, or whether rich coasts do the persuading with fish runs and shellfish you can calendar by the moon. They also debate whether storage creates property rules or property rules create storage, whether staying put improves health with stability or complicates it with trash smoke and neighbors. You stir the stew and refuse to vote from a distance. The truth tastes seasonal. Light travels differently indoors. You stretch a scraped hide across a small window gap. Sunlight turns to cream and drafts to rumor. A dried fish bladder does the job even better, slick and translucent. Stone lamps of fat find niches at shoulder height, so you can sew without roasting your eyebrows. Dangle a little spiral of bark beneath the smoke hole, and the rising heat obligingly slides outside like a trained snake. On cold nights, you heat 3 stones in the coals, 1 for your feet, 1 for the child, 1 for the gossip, who always claims they don't feel the cold and absolutely does. Waste gets a plan. You sight the midden downwind and downhill. You rake ash across scraps so smells stay modest. You over-explain the latrine path because you like visitors and you love your drinking water more. Where mud wrote too many slapstick stories on the way to the river, you lay split logs into a corduroy of good sense. If a snake adopts your woodpile, you grant it a name and a respectful lease. Mice, by contrast, receive eviction notices written in juniper sprigs and tight lids. Mainstream fact pulls out bigger tools when people linger. Grinding stones grow heavy. Saddle querns and later trough querns anchor doorways and hearth corners, their surfaces polished by years of patient circles. Microscopic sickle gloss on some flint edges hints at wild cereals being cut even before formal fields. Commensal mice show up where crumbs are reliable, uninvited roommates that nevertheless testify someone stayed. Some early floors get plastered, some walls are mended again, and then mended just because you've learned to distrust a day without chores. Your hands become a maintenance schedule. Morning sprinkles sand, sweep it out carrying ash and yesterday's accidents. Midday re-daub a sulking crack after rain. Evening bank the fire for tomorrow's speed and today's safety. A cord across the low doorway slows toddlers. Charms of pierced shells hang at tiny hand height, so little fingers choose music over catastrophe. The honeypot gets a dedicated shelf. The ant stapler from the clinic stays outdoors. Thank you kindly. Quirky housewarming custom press. A red ochre thumbprint into the wall by the door. Portable sunshine now anchored. Add a second print for each sleeper within. Guests leave a fingertip, and over a season, the doorframe gathers a nebula of belonging. For lungs, you pin a tuft of juniper above the lintel on coffee nights. The fragrance says both welcome and mind your manners. The village, yes, the word tries itself on sketches a plan without anyone drawing it. Lanes appear where feet prefer to meet. Hearth smoke stacks in friendly stripes when the breeze is right. A central patch, the dimple where nets are mended, pegs carved, and votes cast with laughter collects stories the way a bowl collects berries. Elder shelters angle for breeze. Water carriers live closer to the path. There are no palaces, but there are favorite benches and the kind of social gravity that settles into corners the moment someone starts sharpening a good story. Historians still argue whether first villages were permanent or seasonal aggregations, winter grounds, where scattered bands braided marriages and myths, or whether some groups truly set roots and let the world pass like weather. They also debate whether a very early tower down in a palm-ringed valley is flood management, communal bravado, or a stairway for stories with bonus cardio. You listen politely, then listen locally. Someone just proposed a communal roof repair day, and everyone nodded like a field of reeds. Inside, the curriculum expands. Children learn to thread bone needles and read fire's crackle grammar, the sharp pop of resin, the messy sizzle of wet wood, the soft, steady sigh of good coal building. A tiny flute hangs by the doorway so a bored child produces 2 notes instead of 2 new holes in the wall. The diplomat stands in silhouette like a scepter. Your tool rack finally has more hooks than apologies. The eggshell canteen glows faintly on its shelf. The bark tube that guards the bone needle slides home with a contented click. Night now feels layered. You still bank coals with ash, but you also latch the door flap, check the shell chime, and tuck the hot stone at your feet. A dog turns twice and parks by the windward wall. Somewhere in the lane, a neighbor hums the 3-note all clear from Section 9, and the village answers by relaxing. Smoke climbs through the well-behaved hole stars rehearse above the thatch, and you drift on the small pride of a roof, you persuaded to stay walls that remember your hands and a larder with tomorrow quietly waiting its turn. Morning will bring new cracks, new lists, and the same old wind with the same old opinions. That's fine. Staying put isn't laziness. It's choreography, smoke storage repairs, and neighborly conspiracy practiced until it looks easy. And when the season breaks and the herds write a fresh line across your horizon, you lift the ember in its clay-lined cup, press your palm to the cluster of red thumbprints, close the door, and walk. The hut will weather back into ground, but everything you learned about walls will travel in your wrists and your timing ready to stand up wherever the wind finally decides to be reasonable. You step outside before the village stirs and tilt your chin to the chill, where breath turns briefly into a private cloud. The sky is a dark lake about to flip stars, thinning along the east. A smear of milky path still bright above the big animal dragging its invisible rope toward the ridge. You plant a stick, Just an honest gnomon into yesterday's hole and tamp the soil with your heel. Time for you is not a number. It is a shadow learning manners. First lesson of Sky School. Everything repeats, just never lazily. You watch the morning star sometimes evening, sometimes not practice its stubborn schedule. You watch the moon grow and shrink like a careful baker measuring light. You learn that your own shadow, short and bossy, at midday long and apologetic at dawn, and dusk writes curves you can trust if you give it a pebble. Every noon in the circle you scratched around the gnomon. After a handful of weeks, pebbles form a figure 8, no one named yet a tidy analemma in embryo. And your grin is half weather, half geometry, and all breakfast conversation later. Light joke number 1, you declare the Pebbles calendar granola. Very wholesome. Mainstream fact strolls in with a cold nose. People long before fields read the sky and set stones posts or pits to it. Across the world, megaliths post circles and horizon markers align with solstices and equinoxes. Seasonal shadows climb walls exactly when fish runs fatten or seeds beg for ground. Simple sticks, gnomons, become sundials by personality, and sighting stones make the sunrise behave like a metronome for the year. Even without monuments, the habit of noting where the sun rises along a particular ridge becomes a family tradition that keeps soup on time. Your morning continues with breath that smells faintly of juniper from last night's cough tent. Birds pitch in swallows' high weather fair. Swallows low, a storm rehearses. Ants build taller chimneys ahead of a sudden rain, and you pretend you already planned to move the woodpile under the lean-to. You sniff the metal coin tang of ozone at the edge of your tongue. Lightning has thoughts today. A mare's tail sky long-combed cirrus pulls your mouth into a thin line that means wrap fish tighter. The wind has business. The river's surface writes slanted lines when gusts turn their shoulders. You read speed and direction the way you read footprints with forgiving confidence. You keep 2 calendars because the world does. One lives in the sky, the Pleiades, a small tight cluster that rises at dawn in one season and at dusk in another, telling fishers, foragers, and gossipers across many later cultures when to do what. The other lives in your legs, geese arguing overhead, antelope hooves beating a rumor along the steppe, salmon shouldering upriver until the river mutters, "Uncle." Your brain braids the 2 calendars until the day you can't remember which taught which. Either way, the stew benefits. Quirky but useful timekeeper rides in your pouch a knotted cord. Each dawn, a new knot joins, and on every 7th knot, you slide a bead eggshell disc moon in miniature so weeks hum through your fingers while your eyes are busy with weather. When the moon fattens to round bread, you add a shell charm. When it thins to a blink, you add a tiny scraped notch on a stick that leans by the door. None of this is fancy. All of it is faithful. Historians still argue whether some caves' dot constellations deliberately mirror star fields, Orion, the Southern Cross, the Pleiades, or whether we are seeing our own pattern hunger in old paint. They also debate whether early pit rows in certain windswept places encode lunar months to keep feasts from sliding into the wrong season, or whether the pits are simply pragmatic storage trash, or both lined up the way tidy minds prefer. You stir your own thoughts and keep recording sunrises on your ridge, which is a vote you cast with pebbles. Your shadow circle becomes a community project. Children argue over which pebble sits truest. Elders negotiate with the horizon as if it were a neighbor who once borrowed a basket. On solstice mornings, one day when sunrise sticks its landing farthest north, one day farthest south, you find the oldest stones and mark them with ochre fingerprints, portable sunshine made domestic. That red smear on rock means someone was paying attention, and it means light will return, which are the same sentence when the nights get long. Inside the village, time shapes work. Big grind days cluster after the moon's round belly when your people swear the tide's extra swagger makes fish more foolish and sleep more generous. Snare tending happens by a rhythm you hum under your breath. Left bank on the 3rd day after new moon right, bank on the 6th, because structure makes feet loyal. Births too share nods with the moon. You don't pretend it's magic, but cycles like to hold hands. A grandmother keeps a tally on a polished bone, and while no one says obstetrics, everyone says, bring water now with well-timed calm. Mainstream fact taps your shoulder with a star. The North Star is not eternal. Earth wobbles like a dignified spinning top procession, so the sky's pole star changes over long ages. Different times crown different lights with that title. You don't know the math, but you do notice that north-ish points where a not-quite-fixed light holds court. Future people will name it Polaris. For now, it's simply our reliable friend who drifts slowly like a good story. Your weather kit looks humble a feather to test wind sneaking through the lane, a little clay saucer whose pooling water tells how fast the air is emptying. Your roof's stored rain, a string of shells whose chime shifts pitch when humidity climbs. The bull roarer, your wireless friend from Section 9, plays its low note over the flats to reach the berry pickers. Its sound lies wonderfully about distance, which is a polite way to remind gossip to arrive slower than weather. Fringe feeling practice travels through marriage from a coast you haven't seen. Someone there keeps a tide stone, a smooth disc, with a notch that points to the brightest star at dawn on the day shellfish are fattest. You try it inland with a fish run and find it works just as well as a story you repeat. Another fringe did this one close to home, a seed clock made from a circle of shallow holes, one for each handful of days after the second storm. In each hole, you drop a seed of a weedy cousin to your favorite grain. When a particular hole's plants reach ankle height, you test wild stands nearby. You feel very clever. Light. Joke number 2. You ask the plants what time it is, they answer lunch. Historians still argue whether calendars were invented to schedule harvests, or feasts to time long-distance visits, to predict migrations, or to anchor rituals so they stop drifting like unruly boats. They also argue whether early observers tracked the moon primally for its beauty, practically for its light, or personally for cycles closer to the body. You suspect all of the above because the sky is generous and people are greedy for patterns that work. At the river's lip, you read tiny ripples stacked diagonally, wind over current, and taste the air for the old penny scent again. You call the watch, bring baskets closer. Set kids beneath the lean-to. Peg down that corner of the roof that always thinks it's a bird. When thunder finally speaks, you're ready. The eggshell canteen moon in a net hangs high, the fire low and careful. The dog resigned. Rain falls with the kind of insistence that turns paths into negotiations. Your gully fence holds because you tightened its knots yesterday when a line of ants told you to. Night returns like a teacher who likes you. You lie on your back and let your eyes unfocus until the Milky Way turns to breath across your face. You recite the sky's gossip, the crooked ladder that points to dawn, the bright pair that argue just before first light, the small spoon you use to measure when the first frost will take liberties with your tuber pit. A teenager asks if stars are holes in a big hide. You answer that holes let light through, and sometimes good questions do too. Light joke number 3. Someone claims the Honey Guide's agent lives up there. You counter that the agent prefers higher fees and lower clouds. Mainstream fact sets one last peg even without monuments. People tracked seasons with portable tech beads, notched bones, strings with knots. Later, some places raised stones so shadows would strike carved lines on ritual days, and other places dug rows of pits that, when counted right, promised the right moon for right work. You belong to the long part of that story, the habit of marking just enough to remember and not so much you forget to watch. Before sleep, you push today's pebble into the noon ring and check the solstice marks with a thumb. The shell chime at the door ticks in a wind that has finally spent its temper. In your pocket, the knot cord lies with its new bead like a tiny planet system, gravity measured in fingers. You bank the coals under ash. Listen for the 3-note, all clear, and let your breath match the river's easy, now that the storm has told its story and left. Tomorrow's sky will rise with its old face and a new expression. You will read both, because that is what you do. You keep time with shadows, steer by rumor and constellation, and turn seasons into soft, edible certainty. You wake before the birds vote and step into a morning that smells like cold stone and uncommitted weather. The ground is a book you're learning to read in cursive, narrow prints threading between shrubs, a nicked twig, glinting wet where bark peeled a single hair, snagged on thorn, shining like a whisper that forgot to leave. Hunt day doesn't mean chaos. It means choreography with wind for music, gullies for aisles, and patience for drum. First, the quiet tools. You check a line of snares you set at dusk because night walks on 4 feet more often than you do. Each snare is a slipknot with opinions, plant fiber cord waxed with fat, a springy sapling bent, and pegged a trigger carved yesterday with your burin until it clicked like truth. 2 loops are closed, one kicked wide, one still waiting like a polite mouth. A rabbit hangs quickly and cleanly dispatched. You whisper thanks that no one hears but you, and you reset the loop with hands that don't fumble because you practiced when nothing was watching. Light joke number 1. The snare that misfired gets a stern review from management, your eyebrow. Mainstream fact lays out tracks beside yours. Archaeological sites preserve drive lines and communal kill places, stone alignments that funnel herds, pits along natural bottlenecks arroyos where people steered animals into steep oops with brush noise and timing. Mass kill layers butchered bones and hearths, clustered like footlights, attest to groups acting as one mind. Far earlier, still waterlogged soils gave back long wooden spears. Yes, spears, beautifully balanced and deadly honest proof that throwing and thrusting with planning sits deep in the human toolkit. Later come spear throwers that borrow leverage from a hooked stick, and later still arrows fine enough to vanish and sharp enough to matter. Today's plan uses a hill that pinches into river. You've walked it in your head all week. 2 drivers will be windward, unspooling a music of rustle and suggestion. 3 flankers, shadowy shrubs with legs, will set the corridor. You take the hinge where a fallen log makes the ground tell feet to choose left. A net waits low woven from bast into a wall that lies down until it doesn't. Dogs, those smoky-eyed allies who traded wild nights for warm hearths, range ahead, circling scent, pressing just enough to make hooves think straight lines are a bad habit. You've slept beside those dogs since they were fist-sized and full of complaint. They've learned your whistle like a second name. You refresh the old signals you practiced by firelight. 1 grunt, 2 whistles, 1 tap, and tie a braid of grass at eye level on a leaning branch, this way in leaves sands. The bull roar stays in your pouch. Today doesn't need thunder, it needs suggestion. You smear ash stripes along wrists, charcoal chic anti-mosquito pro focus, and bite a sliver of dried meat so your stomach doesn't audition for comic relief. The eggshell canteen moon in a net hangs where your hand finds it without looking. The drive begins as a rumor. A hare shoots and vanishes. A flock murmurs up and away. Wind carries your neighborhood's intentions. You place your feet on stone, not soil, when you can sound swallowed sign spared. At the pinch point, you kneel where the log learns to be a bridge press, your palm to dirt, and feel faint as a remembered joke the rhythm of hooves. Not frantic, persuaded. Good. A doe appears first, then 2 yearlings, then the bulk of the small herd, each animal choosing the path that looks chosen by the one before. Your job isn't to be fast, it's to be inevitable. A step, a breath, a hand lifted just so. The net rises with a dry whisper. The hinge becomes a circle. A short spear goes like a sentence built yesterday and spoken well today. The animal drops quickly. There is gratitude and there is work, and you keep both tidy. Historians still argue whether persistence hunting, running an animal until heat does what speed cannot, was common or a specialized art in certain hot, open landscapes. They argue how early poison-tipped projectiles entered the playbook, and from which plants, bark beans, saps, those ideas bled into practice. They debate the age of the bow in different regions, peering at microliths, residues, and tiny fractures, as if the stone might whisper string. You nod along to all the maybes and keep adapting your tactics to hills and weather, because dogma feeds fewer mouths than topography. Quirky but real trick from a reedy river. You'll visit next season, fish weirs that write geometry into appetite. You set stones into a wide V that points downstream. As the river lowers, fish follow the edge like well-behaved guests drifting into a wicker basket they suddenly regret. On coasts, the same trick happens with tides, stone corrals drowning, and reappearing like polite traps. Birds, to a line of slip nooses on a pole where ground doves can't resist landing, or a smear of sticky bird lime on a favored twig that asks feathers to reconsider their schedule. You use these lightly because plenty tomorrow tastes better than plenty today. The dogs get their share and their praise. They also get a lesson when one pushes too hard and spooks the line time out by your side, a quiet hand, a later reward for restraint that feels like twice the meat. They learn because they live in your stories. Now, the night fire tales, the watch songs, the uninsulted meat. You tie a bell of shells to the bold pup's collar just for this hunt, so you know where confidence went. Confidence learns to stay slightly left of where the deer will pass, not in the deer. Progress. At midday, you switch costumes. Hunter becomes engineer because a single good plan can double dip. You carve stakes to repair a deadfall trap on the game trail log propped with a cunning trigger heavy enough to insult the ambitions of a root-digging boar. You armor the trigger against weather with a little roof of bark. A child watches open-mouthed and you let small hands place the last twig. Ownership is the strongest glue you know. Mainstream fact checks in again. From riverside stone fish traps, survive low water and drought visible even to satellites long after their makers' names retired to soil. Elsewhere, blinds and corrals in high country passes tell of antlered seasons when entire communities converged, beating lines of brush and flags that fluttered like a rumor animals believed. At the butchery sites, cut marks shout, sequence hide first meat. Next tendons, harvested for thread, and fractures on long bones. Whisper marrow and boiling stones, a script you can run while half asleep. Light joke number 2 arrives with the diplomat. Which you left with the stew, but brought in spirit. You are stirring trouble only gently today. Drivers tease, not terrify. A calm herd is a readable paragraph. A panicked herd is a library fire. Your flank partner raises 2 fingers, wind shift. You adjust the hinge 10 paces back and lay 1 more braid of grass where it will catch the corner of an eye. The corridor bends with you. Brains beat brawn not by shouting, but by editing. A small delicious failure rounds the afternoon. Your deadfall accrues a visitor with hands too clever. Raccoon perhaps who steals bait and leaves the trigger smugly intact. You laugh, tip your head to the thief's degree, and rebait with a puzzle whose answer is raccoon gives up. Light joke number 3, you call this peer review. The peer in question is striped and judgmental. By late day, the work finishes with a ritual that isn't called ritual. Quick dispatch, clean cuts, fat saved like candles that pretend to be soup later. Bones cracked with the practiced flick that tells marrow you've read this chapter. Liver offered to an elder with a hunger that honors the morning's plan. Nothing wasted, not even the story which you begin shaping already, where the wind turned polite, where the dog remembered restraint, where the net rose like a quiet wall at exactly the right second. Because last week, you fixed the broken mesh instead of telling yourself a story about tomorrow. Historians still argue whether big communal hunts shaped language more verbs for almost and not yet tighter grammar. For you go, I wait, or whether language already ambidextrous and bossy simply made bigger hunts possible. They argue whether painted scenes of animals with lines, dots, and strange masked people are hunting manuals, trance diaries, or both. Your answer is to teach the signals to the children in a game that ends with roasted tuber coins and a very serious conversation about why we replace snares we borrow from the future. Back at camp, insulting the meat makes a cameo gentle, affectionate because the hunter who threw today's cleanest spear is getting loud around the fire. That tiny thing someone teases. We'll need magnifying glass soup. The laugh trims the story into something the group can eat, and you are grateful for the old social medicine. The diplomat returned to your hands stirs a pot heavy with choices, strips for drying pieces, for sharing bones for broth. Dogs snore by the windward wall. The shell bell comes off the bold pup's neck and hangs by the door, chiming once like a tiny good job. You bank the coals under ash, check the snares one last time in your mind, and lay the spear where your hand finds it in dark without accidents. Tomorrow you'll mend the net where one knot sulked, recarve a trigger with a notch that refuses to lie, and mark the log that was a bridge and is by morning just a log again. You fall asleep hearing hoofbeats that are really your pulse slowing, and in your dream, the corridor of shrubs becomes a corridor of stars, and the plan you walked today becomes a path through sky. You do not run faster than what you hunt. You move wiser. That's the point, and you carry it like a tool. You wake to a hush that isn't weather. The village moves gently, voices cushioned footsteps, airing their heels before they land. An elder has taken to the far side of sleep in the hours before dawn, and the day folds itself small around the fact. You wash your hands in ash and water, our faithful soap, and add a breath of juniper to the coals so the smoke leans sweet. The shell chime at the door answers softly, as if someone practiced being careful and got good at it. You have tasks. You comb hair because nitpicking has always been about more than pests. It's how hands say you matter when words are clumsy. You wipe the elder's brow with a cloth warmed by the hearth and lay a bead string by their shoulder, a whispering strand of eggshell moons that has kept time with this life. The diplomat gets one slow turn in the stew because everybody still needs breakfast. Grief is patient, but bodies are not. Light joke number 1. You tell the pot it's now stirring feelings too. It takes the promotion with dignity. Mainstream fact, sits down respectfully. Deep time burials exist. In caves and shallow ground, bodies rest with red ochre brushed on bone, with tools with antlers laid like parentheses with shells that still click faintly when you move them. At Sunghir, far to the north, and long ago, people were buried with thousands of ivory beads and finely carved spears. Each bead may have cost an afternoon, a gift of time that outlived the givers. Earlier still, at school and kafzi, ochre shadows and purposeful placement tell of care. And at Shanidar, a Neanderthal with a withered arm lived long in the company of others. Then was laid to rest evidence of a habit older than our particular face, tending and farewell. You prepare the place. A shallow pit where roots don't meddle and water keeps its distance. A lining of woven reeds if the ground allows, soft and orderly, the way the elder liked their tools. Red ochre mixes with fat until it gleams portable sunshine, invited to become permanent. Someone brings the eggshell canteen moon in a net full and stoppered a token for thirst. No one can name, but everyone understands. You tuck a sliver of honeycomb in a bark bowl because sweetness belongs with endings as much as with beginnings. A bone flute lies beside the beads. It will not be played here, but a hand can find it in the night. Quirky tidbit that feels right in your bones, you thread a few beads into the fringe of the elder's hood, so when wind visits, it will hear the person it loved speaking softly. In some places, folk make small rattles to tie in trees near graves. The air does the singing when family can't. You also set a thumb of pitch by the head resin that mends and seals, as if to say, even now we know how to fix what we can. Dogs lie with their chins on their paws, just outside the circle, and watch with the kind of silence that feels like understanding. Historians still argue whether the famous pollen at Shanidar means a flower burial, or whether burrowing rodents carried in blooms long after the grave was made. They still argue whether red ochre is medicine against smell, and insects symbol of blood and rebirth, or all of the above braided together by usefulness and metaphor. They debate whether beads in graves are wealth buried on purpose status, locked away to honor the dead, or the community's most extravagant way of saying, "Keep this. We'll manage." You nod to all three with your own small vote. The time you spend ties your day to theirs. The village gathers in the ring where evening stories usually breathe. A singer starts low the three-note all clear, from night watch slowed to the pace of walking. You hum, and the hum turns into enough courage for everyone to hold a corner of the silence without dropping it. The Honey Guide's agent gets one quiet cameo in the eulogy fees waived today, and the chuckle turns the tight place in chests into something that can exhale. Light. Joke number 2. Very light. Very kind. The body rests wrapped in a hide rubbed soft patched by many hands stitched with the bone needle that has kept our days together. You press your ochre thumb into the doorpost when you pass the house's nebula of prints, gaining one more star, and you follow the slow procession to the chosen ground. Children carry the shell rattle, elders carry the time. At the lip of the pit, you pause long enough to remember last winter's fire banking, under dung and clay, the way embers sleep and wake the next day, and how memory travels the same way when we cover it gently and leave it air to breathe. A short rite of calling names begins. Not poetry inventory reminders, jokes until repetition rounds them into verses that even sleepy minds can carry. The diplomat stands in the middle of the circle like a scepter, then humbly returns to the stew. You place the first scoop of earth with a whispered thank you that is wider than the mouth that speaks it. A bead goes in. A second bead stays out tied at your belt to click against its siblings when you walk, proof that part of goodbye is remembering to keep moving. Mainstream fact turns one more page in later prehistory. Some people plaster skulls and paint eyes open, keeping ancestors in the house as if the wall could hold the past the way the heart does. Elsewhere, figurines, big-bellied, tiny-faced, gravity-wise crowd. Hearth shelves their meanings, argued by future scholars, while the present kept them close. You don't have plaster, but you have songs, and you have a way of pausing at the doorframe to touch the prints and say we are a long story told by many mouths. Practicalities continue because love cooks. Food arrives to the grieving like a tied stone-boiled stew. Tuber coins with a fingertip of honey strips hung over smoke to carry tomorrow. The work of care rotates. One person sleeps by the bereft. One stokes the coals. One patrols the lane. One sits with a child who has questions shaped like thunderstorms. Your dog patrols the doorway and accepts payment in ear scratches. Order returns in small edible increments. Fringe-feeling practice that keeps surprising you with its calm, a night of watch at the grave, not because you believe mischief will try something, but because the act of staying says to your bones, we do not drop each other. The bull roarer stays in its pouch. Wind has said enough. Instead, a shell horn breathes 3 tones toward the ridge where stars walk their old route. You talk to the elder as if they are listening about the net that rose at the right time, about the bead knot on the calendar cord, about the knee that finally stopped arguing after the pine steam tent. If no one is there to hear, the river is, and it keeps secrets well. Historians still argue whether defleshing and bone-cleaning gentle reverent in some places are signs of ancestor cults, sanitation secondary burial, or all of the above wearing different regional hats. They argue whether a carved half-cat, half-man figure from far away is a god, a story, or an inside joke so good it lasted millennia. You smile at the idea of jokes outliving their tellers. You wipe your hands in ash, and the ash looks back like a friend who never left. By dawn the next day, the house feels like itself again, which is to say, full of tasks. You retie the shell bundle by the door, so it sings when the breeze remembers to visit. You set one bowl aside at supper for 3 nights, not because ghosts eat, but because habit and gratitude do. You carry a new bead on the belt, and it clicks a half beat behind the old ones as if learning the song. The village hums the 3-note all clear, and the note holds longer than usual, patched by many lungs. Light joke number 3, Someone says the honey guide's agent negotiated for a fourth note. The choir refuses on artistic grounds. Future memories get their roots now. You carve one more notch on the message stick and pair it with a verse. You show a child where the solstice pebbles live around the gnomon. You press a tiny ochre thumbprint next to the door where a new sleeper has taken up the elder's blanket. The eggshell canteen moon in a net hangs above the diplomat's peg like a small round oathwater and warmth kept ready. When you step out into night, the stars read as usual and as different, which is what grief does to everything. And you breathe with the village until the breathing matches the river again. We live by tools, plan songs, and promises. We leave handprints, beads, and fire scars. We lay our dead down carefully, then stand up carefully, and we keep walking with a rhythm that keeps the group one creature. Tomorrow asks for all the same skills: napping, cooking, sewing, trading, tracking, reading the weather, banking, the coals, and one more: caring. What we loved forward without letting it weigh down our steps. You shoulder that skill with the rest and feel it settle heavier than a net, lighter than a spear, exactly the right size to fit in a life. Set the tools down where hands can find them in the morning. Let the shell chime answer the smallest drafts, while the smoke hole learns the stillness of night. The fire has become its best self, no drama, just a red hush, and the coals hold together like a thought that doesn't need to be spoken again. Stretch your fingers once and let them forget the day. They have earned it. Somewhere outside, a dog changes sides and sighs. The sound is a warm stone at your feet. Slow the room. Curtains of quiet draw themselves across the doorway, across the lane, across the field, where the grass lays its head. Names you called today become soft, and then softer, until they are simply company at the edge of sleep. The moon, round or a sliver, whatever it chose tonight, hangs in its net of branches and looks pleased with the engineering. The beads at your belt settle. The last click is permission to close your eyes. Think of the steady things, the gnomon shadow by noon, the three-note watch song after dark, the way a spoon. The diplomat, faithful mediator, stirs circles until quarrels forget their shape. Think of the good gossip of water over stones, and how the sky, even on nights when clouds rehearse their dramas, still remembers where to put the stars when the curtain lifts. Let your breath lengthen to meet that remembering. If there is a question left over, place it beside the coals and let it keep warm until morning. Most questions are kinder after sleep. Draw the hide up to your shoulder. Feel the roof listen for rain, and then relax. Feel the ember under its blanket promise tomorrow's fire without asking you to tend it now. You are carried by the old arrangement's hand song shelter, and the older ones, still earth-turning river, moving sky returning. Rest inside them. Let the village breathe you down to quiet.